Sergeant Mason Reed threw it hard, straight at the back of Daniel Carter's head. A joke, he'd call it later. Just a joke. And 40 soldiers watched a quiet maintenance man catch it in midair without turning around. Nobody laughed after that. Mason had spent his whole career making men flinch. He had never once seen a man not flinch. And here's the part nobody in that hangar knew. The file with Daniel Carter's real name in it had been sealed by 3 separate agencies, and every man who signed it was told the same thing. If he ever comes back, don't corner him. Mason was about to corner him. Stay with me all the way to the end of this one, folks, and drop the name of your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels. If you like stories where the quiet man turns out to be the last man you should have touched, subscribe. This one earns it. The wrench hung in the air between them for a second, that lasted a great deal longer than a second. Daniel Carter turned around slowly. He had it by the handle, fingers wrapped clean around the grip, the way a man holds a tool he intends to keep using. There was no grip adjustment, no fumble. It had simply arrived in his hand, the way a set of keys arrives in your pocket. "Sergeant," he said, "you dropped this." Mason Reed's mouth opened, then it shut. 40 men in Hangar 3 had stopped what they were doing. That was the thing about a base. Nothing traveled faster than silence. "You threw it?" said a voice from somewhere in the back. Private Ellis, 22 years old, 4 months in, still dumb enough to say true things out loud. "I dropped it," Mason said. "You threw it, Sergeant." "Ellis, so help me God." "It's fine." Daniel walked forward and set the wrench down on the tool bench handle out exactly the way you'd hand it to somebody. Then he went back to the door hinge he'd been working on for the last 20 minutes and knelt back down, just like that. Back to the hinge. And that more than the catch was what got under Mason Reed's skin, because a man who catches a wrench thrown at his skull is supposed to do something about it. He's supposed to get loud, get red, get in your face, and make threats he can't back up so you can laugh at him, and everybody can go home feeling like the order of the world held. Daniel Carter went back to the hinge. Mason walked over and stood behind him. Close. Close enough that his boot was almost touching Daniel's heel. "You know what you are," Mason said. "I'm a contractor." "You're a mascot." Mason said it loud to the room because Mason Reed never said anything to one man when he could say it to 40. "They keep you around like a stray dog. Feed you a little, let you sleep in the shed. You fix lockers. We protect the country." Somebody laughed. Then 2 somebodies. Then it caught the way it always caught, because that was Mason's real gift. Not strength, not speed, but the ability to make other men afraid of being the one who didn't laugh. Daniel kept working. Screwdriver quarter turn test the swing, quarter turn back. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." "I'm listening, Sergeant." "I said look at me." Daniel looked at him. And here is a thing that has never been written down in any manual, but every fighting man alive knows it in his bones. There are eyes that are scared of you, and eyes that are angry at you, and eyes that are measuring you. 2 of those you can work with. The third one is a problem. Mason had been in the sandbox twice. He'd seen the third kind exactly once in a doorway in Ramadi on a man he'd had to shoot. Daniel Carter's eyes were flat and patient, and about a mile deep, and for 1/2 of 1 second, Mason Reed felt something crawl up the back of his neck that he had not felt since he was 26 years old. Then Daniel smiled a small, tired, apologetic thing, and the feeling went away, and Mason decided he'd imagined it. "Sorry," Daniel said. "Long day. My daughter's got a school thing at 4. "Your daughter's got the school thing," Mason repeated, and turned to the room like a man setting up the punchline of his life. "Gentlemen, take notes. This is what happens when a man's got nothing to protect but a lunchbox." The hangar laughed. Daniel picked up his bag, said, "Have a good one, fellas," and walked out into the Montana afternoon. He was 4 minutes late to the school. Lily was on the low wall by the flagpole, with her backpack on both shoulders and her chin on her knees. And when she saw the truck, she jumped up and did the thing she'd done since she was 5, which was run at the passenger door and yank it open before the truck had entirely stopped moving. Kiddo. Rolling vehicle. You were rolling slow. Rolling's rolling. You were basically parked. She climbed in, threw the backpack in the footwell, and hauled the door shut with both hands. Dad, okay. So. Mrs. Vance said I read at a 6th grade level. Is that good? Dad, I'm in 3rd grade. Huh, Daniel said. So it's bad. She stared at him with the exact flat, unimpressed expression of her mother, and Daniel had to look at the road for a second. It's good, she said. It means I'm the best reader. That's what it means, huh? That's what it implies. Where'd you get implies? 6th grade level, Lily said, and buckled her seatbelt, and Daniel Carter laughed out loud in his truck for the first time all day. They stopped at the Sinclair on Route 12 because it was Friday, and Friday meant one slushy blue. No exceptions. No negotiation, a treaty signed years ago. Lily went in with $3 and came back out with a slushie and 80 cents in change, and handed the change back with the seriousness of a bank teller. Keep it, Daniel said. It's not mine. It's yours if I say it's yours. That's not how money works. Kid, that's exactly how money works. She thought about it the whole drive home. He could hear her thinking. That was the thing nobody warned you about with kids. You could actually hear it. Then halfway down the gravel road to the house out of nowhere. Dad, were you ever a soldier? He didn't answer fast. That was rule 1. Fast answers are lies wearing a good suit. Why? Because Tommy Reed said his dad said you were a fake. Daniel's hands stayed exactly where they were on the wheel. 10 and 2. Tommy Reed, he said. His dad's a sergeant. I know. He said you're a fake and you pretend to be tough. Lily was watching the road, not him, and her voice had gone small in the way it went small when she'd been carrying something around all day and didn't want to put it down in front of him. He said his dad said he said a word. I'm not supposed to say it. You can say it. He said you're a nobody. The truck kept going down the gravel road at exactly the same speed. Okay, Daniel said. That's it? Okay. What do you want me to say, kiddo? I want you to say it's not true. And Daniel Carter pulled the truck over on the shoulder of a gravel road in Montana, put it in park, and turned in his seat to look at his 8-year-old daughter and said the truest thing he had said out loud in 11 years. Lily, look at me. There are 2 kinds of nobody. There's the kind that means you don't matter. He tapped the console once. And there's the kind that means nobody can find you. Those are not even close to the same thing, and one day I'll tell you the difference. Not today, but one day. She stared at him. Which one are you? Drink your slushie. Dad? Drink your slushie, kid. The dinner that night was macaroni. The dinner most nights was macaroni. Daniel Carter could field strip a rifle in the dark in under 9 seconds, and could not, after 8 years of trying, make a chicken that Lily would eat. She went down at 8:30. He read to her, she read to him more accurately, and corrected his pronunciation twice, and then he sat in the dark kitchen with a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking and did not move for a long time. He was thinking about the wrench, not about the throw, about the catch. 11 years. 11 years of not being that. 11 years of eating the joke, taking the shove, saying, have a good one, fellas. He'd built a whole man out of nothing, brick by brick, a man who fixed hinges, a man who was 4 minutes late, a man who lost arguments about slushy change, and he had built that man on purpose for her, because the other man could not be a father. The other man could only be a weapon. And this afternoon, for 1 second, in front of 40 witnesses, the other man had answered the door. You know better, he thought. You know exactly what that looked like. He put the coffee down. He knew what that looked like. It looked like a question. And in his experience, questions did not stop being asked just because you stopped answering them. They were asking it before he'd even left the parking lot. He caught it. Ellis said for the 4th time in the chow hall at 1900. He got lucky, said Corporal Boyd. Behind his head, Boyd. He heard it coming. You can't hear a wrench. You can hear anything if you're jumpy enough, and that man's a jumpy little... He wasn't jumpy. Ellis put his fork down. He was 22 and dumb enough to say true things out loud, and he was about to do it again. That's the thing. Y'all are missing it. He wasn't jumpy. A jumpy guy ducks. A jumpy guy screams. He didn't even turn around first. He turned around after. You understand what I'm telling you. He caught it, and then he turned around to see who threw it. That's backwards. That's not how a person works. The table went quiet. So what are you saying? Boyd said. Ellis picked his fork back up. I'm saying my uncle was 75th Ranger, and he used to catch stuff like that. And when I asked him how he did it, he said, "You don't do it, kid, it does you." And I didn't know what that meant until about 2 o'clock this afternoon. Mason Reed did not eat in the chow hall that night. Mason Reed was in the admin building at 2100 with a coffee and a favor he'd called in from a personnel clerk named Whitaker, who owed him for something neither of them talked about. Carter, Daniel, Whitaker said, typing. Contractor badge Tier 2, escorted access only, started 11 months ago. Give me his DD-214. He's a civilian mace. Everybody's got a DD-214. No, everybody who served has a DD-214. Civilians have a resume. Whitaker scrolled. Resume says 12 years commercial, HVAC in Boise. References check out. Background checks clean. Credits mediocre. Guy's got a kid. Guy's got a truck. Guy's got a mortgage he's 4 years into. Mace, he's a guy. Run him anyway. Run him against what? Against everything. Whitaker looked up. You want me to run a maintenance contractor against DOD personnel records because he made you look stupid in a hangar. He made me look stupid. That's what I heard. Whitaker. I'm running him. Keys. More keys. A long pause. Then Whitaker stopped typing. Huh. What? Nothing. What, Whitaker? It's nothing. It's just... He leaned back. 12 years HVAC in Boise, right before that, nothing. And I mean nothing. No W-2s, no school, no addresses, no okay. Look, everybody's got a mess in their file. Everybody's got a gap where they were dealing weed in 2009 or living in their mom's basement. Guys have gaps. That's normal. So he doesn't have a gap? Whitaker turned the monitor. He's got a floor. It's like the man was manufactured at age 27 with a wrench in his hand. Mason looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he smiled, and it was not a nice smile, and it was the exact expression of a man who has just found the thing he wanted to find, and has not stopped for 1 second to ask himself why it was so easy to find. He's hiding something, Mason said. Or he's nothing, Whitaker said. You ever think about that? Maybe he's just a nobody with a boring life and a bad childhood he doesn't want to talk about, and you're about to spend a month of your life proving that a man who fixes doors fixes doors. Nobody's a nobody. Mace? Nobody's a nobody, Whitaker. Everybody's somebody. And the ones who work real hard at looking like nobody. He tapped the monitor twice hard right on the man's name. Those are the ones you gotta look at twice. Which was, and this is worth sitting with, the single most correct thing Sergeant Mason Reed said in the entire month of October. The thing about a base is that it is a small town with better fences. By Monday, everybody had a theory. Boyd's theory was that Carter was a coward who got out early and was ashamed. Ellis's theory involved his uncle and the Rangers and got him told to shut up 11 times. There was a theory going around the motor pool that Carter had done time. There was a theory in the S2 shop which nobody was supposed to know about, and which was the only one that mattered, and it went like this. Somebody had been pulling files. Not a lot. Not the kind of thing that trips a wire. A little at a time over months. Access logs with 3-minute holes in them. A server closet whose door sensor reported closed for 6 hours on a night. The sensor had been physically opened. A transfer log with the neatest, most considerate deletion the S2 warrant officer had ever seen in 19 years. Somebody was in the house. Somebody had been in the house a long time, and on the whiteboard in that shop, under the heading, Personnel. Anomalous. Somebody had written a name 11 days before Mason Reed ever threw a wrench. Carter D. Contractor. Present on site for 6 of 9 events. The warrant officer's name was Reyes. She'd looked at that line for 11 days. She'd been in this business long enough to know it was too clean, that a man who was present for 6 of 9 events and did not know he was being watched would have been present for 9 of 9, and a man who did know would have been present for 0. 6 of 9 wasn't a leak. 6 of 9 was a man with a work order and a badge who was in the building because that was his job. 6 of 9 was a coincidence, and Reyes hated coincidences the way other people hated snakes. But that Monday, her captain walked in with a report from a Sergeant Mason Reed, alleging the contractor had displayed advanced combat reflexes inconsistent with civilian training. And Reyes looked at her whiteboard for a long, long moment. "Ma'am," her analyst said. "Pull his badge scans," Reyes said. "All 11 months. And do me a favor." "Ma'am?" "Don't tell Sergeant Reed we're doing it." Daniel knew by Tuesday. He didn't know because he was clever. He knew because of the coffee. There was a woman in Building 4 named Dot who had worked that front desk for 26 years and had never once let him pass the door without handing him a cup of coffee, black no sugar, in a paper cup every single time for 11 months. On Tuesday, Dot did not hand him a coffee. "Morning, Dot." "Morning, Danny." "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine." He signed the log. He looked at the log. There was a fresh page in it, and the fresh page had a column that had not been in the old page, and the column said, "Escort name and rank." "Huh," Daniel said. "That's new." "Policy," Dot said, and would not look at him, and Dot had looked him in the eye every single morning for 11 months. And that was how Daniel Carter learned at 07:05 on a Tuesday that the United States military had opened a file on him. He fixed the thing he had come to fix. He signed out. He said, "Have a good one, Dot." And Dot said, "You too, Danny," in a voice with a crack in it, because Dot had raised 4 boys and knew exactly what it sounded like when a good man was about to have a very bad month. He got in his truck and sat there. Leave. It was right there. It was the whole plan, actually the plan he'd had since the day he'd signed the mortgage. There was cash in a coffee can in the crawl space and a second set of paper in a lockbox in Butte, and he could have Lily in the truck in 40 minutes and be a memory by nightfall. He'd done it before. He'd done it to a whole country before. He put his hand on the key. And then he thought about Lily on that low wall with her chin on her knees, reading at a 6th grade level, telling Mrs. Vance that her dad fixed things, and about the fact that this was the 3rd house and the 2nd name and the first place she'd ever had a friend, and that if he pulled her out of that school, she would be 8 years old and she would be a ghost too. And he had spent 11 years and everything he had making sure of exactly one thing. She would never ever have to be what he was. Daniel took his hand off the key. "Okay," he said to nobody in an empty truck in a parking lot in Montana. "Okay." That was the moment. If you want to know where this whole story turned, it wasn't the hangar. It wasn't the wrench. It was a man in a truck deciding to stay. They came at him from 4 directions over the next 9 days, and Daniel Carter let every single one of them land. They pulled his badge tier and made him wait 40 minutes for an escort. He waited and read the paper. They put him on the worst work order on the base, the boiler in Building 9, which was 94 degrees and had killed the last 2 contractors' backs. He fixed it in a day and a half, and it ran better than it had in a decade. Boyd accidentally backed a forklift into his truck. Daniel looked at the dent, said, "She's got a lot of those," and drove it home. And Mason Reed watched all of it, and grew day by day more certain and more furious and more right in the specific way a man is right when he is completely wrong, because in Mason's world, there were exactly 2 kinds of men. There were men who hit back, and there were cowards. Daniel Carter did not hit back. Therefore, "He's a coward," Mason told the table. "He fixed the boiler," Ellis said. "Ellis, I swear to God, he fixed the boiler, Sergeant. Nobody's fixed the boiler since 2019. You got a crush on this guy." "I got a warm room, Sergeant." The table laughed, and Mason Reed laughed too, and it came out wrong, and he heard it come out wrong, and he looked around the table, and understood something that scared him more than any wrench. They weren't laughing with him anymore. They were laughing at the joke. Those are different, and Mason Reed had built his entire life on not knowing the difference. On the 10th day, Tommy Reed pushed Lily Carter off the bleachers behind the elementary school and called her father a traitor. She got a sprained wrist out of it and a scrape from her elbow to her shoulder, and the school called Daniel at 2:40, and he was there at 2:51, which was 14 miles in 11 minutes, and the principal noticed that and didn't say anything about it. Lily was in the nurse's office with her arm in a wrap, and she wasn't crying, which was so much worse. "Hey, kiddo." "I'm fine." "I can see that." "I am." "I know." He crouched down. "Can I see it?" She held out her arm. He didn't touch it. He just looked, and his eyes went over the wrist and the elbow, and up the arm to the shoulder, and the principal, a woman named Beth Halloran, who had been doing this for 31 years, noticed that too, and later at home, she would tell her husband. He didn't look at her like a dad. For about 4 seconds, he looked at her like a medic, and then he was a dad again. "Does it hurt when you turn it?" "A little." "Turn it." She turned it. He watched. "It's not broken," he said. The nurse said it's not broken. Now 2 of us said it. And that got her. That got the crack in her, and her chin went, and she said in a voice that was 8 years old, and nothing else. "He said you're a traitor. He said his dad said you're hiding something, and that's why the soldiers took your badge away, and everybody knows." And I said, "No, he isn't." And he pushed me, and I fell. "And Dad, are you hiding something?" And Daniel Carter knelt on a linoleum floor in an elementary school nurse's office and understood with total clarity that he had 11 years of work in his hands and that it was made of glass. "Lily," he said, "are you?" "Yes." Her eyes went wide. "Yes," he said, "I am. And it is not a bad thing, and it is not a shameful thing, and I am going to tell you every single word of it when you're old enough to carry it, and I will never lie to you about it, and I'm not lying to you right now. Do you believe me?" Long silence. "Yes," Lily said. "Okay. Is it about Mom?" Daniel closed his eyes for 1 second. "Some of it," he said. He was in the school parking lot with her in the truck when Mason Reed pulled in. Mason was in his POV off-duty out of uniform, and he had Tommy in the passenger seat, and he got out and slammed the door and came across that lot fast with his chest out. And here is the thing you have to understand about what happened next, because everything after this is downstream of it. Mason Reed did not come to apologize. He came to win. "Carter." Daniel shut Lily's door, gently. He walked around the front of the truck and met Mason 6 feet from it and put himself between Mason and that passenger window and did it so naturally that Mason didn't even register it happening. "Sergeant, your kid pushed my son." Daniel looked at him. "My kid," he said, "has a sprained wrist. My son says she started it. Your son is standing on her sandwich in that photo, Sergeant. There's a photo. A parent took a photo." Daniel's voice never went up, not once. That was the thing everybody who ever told this story later agreed on. The man never raised his voice. "But that's not what I want to talk about." "Oh, you want to talk?" "I want to talk about the word traitor." Mason stopped. "Your son said it," Daniel said. 8-year-olds don't come up with traitor. They come up with stupid and poopy, and my dad can beat up your dad. Traitor is a grown man's word. He tilted his head very slightly. So an 8-year-old heard a grown man say it, in his house, probably on the phone, probably more than once. The parking lot was very quiet. "You want to come at me, Sergeant? Come at me. Throw a wrench, wreck my truck, put me on the boiler. I'll fix your boiler for the next 30 years and say thank you." He took 1 step forward, just one. "But you put my daughter's name in your mouth in your own kitchen, where your child could hear it, and your child put his hands on her. So I'm going to ask you one question, and I want you to think very carefully, because I have been the most patient man in the state of Montana for 11 months, and you should ask yourself why a man would need that much practice." Mason's jaw worked. You threatening me?" "No," Daniel said. "I'm asking you a question." "What question?" And Daniel Carter looked at Sergeant Mason Reed and said in the flattest, calmest, most ordinary voice in the world, "Is it going to happen again?" Nobody moved. Later, years later, Mason would try to explain this moment to a room full of young NCOs. And he'd fail, and he'd try again, and he'd fail. And finally, he'd just say, "He asked me a question, and I could not get any air in." Because Mason Reed had spent 18 years learning how to read a threat. He knew the tells. Chest out, chin up, hands up, voice up. That was a man asking for permission to stop. That was a man who wanted you to talk him down. Daniel Carter's hands were at his sides. His breathing hadn't changed. His weight was even. His voice was bored. And every instinct Mason had, every instinct that had kept him alive through 2 deployments, was screaming one single word at him, and the word was not fight, and it was not flight. And Mason Reed had never in his life heard this particular one before. "Don't." "Sergeant," Daniel said, "is it going to happen again?" "No," Mason said. "Thank you." And Daniel turned around and got in his truck and drove his daughter home. Mason Reed stood in that parking lot for a full minute after the truck was gone. His hands were shaking. He looked at them like they belonged to somebody else. Then his son rolled the window down and said, "Dad, are we going?" And Mason Reed said, "Yeah, bud," and got in the car and did not remember driving home. That night at 2340, Daniel Carter did the thing he had promised himself he would never do again. He went out to the shed. Lily was asleep. The wind was doing what the wind does in Montana in October. He unlocked the shed and moved a shelf that was not a shelf, and got down on one knee and pulled up a floorboard that had been cut 11 years ago by a man who no longer existed. There was a metal case in the hole. He didn't open it. He just put his hand flat on the lid and knelt there in the dark for a long, long time, and when he finally spoke, it was so quiet that the wind almost took it. "I'm sorry," he said. He wasn't talking to the case. He was talking to a woman who had been dead for 6 years, who had once made him promise, hand on her hand in a hospital room at the end, "Promise me she never has to know what you were." Daniel Carter had kept that promise for 6 years. He took his hand off the lid and put the floorboard back and locked the shed and went inside and stood in the doorway of his daughter's room and watched her sleep with her wrapped wrist on top of the blanket. And what he said, finally standing there, the last thing anybody said that night, in that house, in that state, on that whole long night in October, was 6 words. "Okay," Daniel said. "You've got my attention now." At 6:12 on Wednesday morning, 6 hours and 32 minutes after Daniel Carter put that floorboard back, Chief Warrant Officer Elena Reyes was standing in front of her whiteboard with a cup of coffee she had forgotten to drink, and she was doing the thing she did when a case had started to smell wrong, which was arguing with herself out loud in an empty room. 6 of 9, she said. Nobody answered because it was 6 in the morning and she was alone. 6 of 9. If you're him, you're 9 of 9 or you're 0 of 9. 6 of 9 is a man with a clipboard. Her analyst, a specialist named Park, who had learned in 4 months on the job that the correct move at 0612 was to say nothing and hand her a fresh coffee, handed her a fresh coffee. "Ma'am, the badge scans came back. And it's weird. Park, everything in this building is weird. Narrow it down." Park put a printout on the desk and stood back like it might go off. 11 months of scans, he said. Carter Daniel, contractor tier 2. He's badged into 31 buildings 640-something times. It's all normal. It's boring. It's a guy going to work. So on 4 separate nights, his badge scans into building 6. At times he was demonstrably somewhere else. Reyes set the coffee down. Define demonstrably. His truck's on the gate camera going out at 17:04 on the 12th. His badge hits the building 6 side door at 22:10 the same night. He's 14 miles away, ma'am. There's a Sinclair station on Route 12 with a card transaction at $21583 even, and there's a camera, and it's him and his kid buying a slushie." The room got very quiet. "Say the next part," Reyes said. "Ma'am, you know what the next part is. Say it." Park swallowed. "Somebody cloned his badge. Somebody cloned his badge," Reyes repeated, and she felt the whole thing tilt under her, the way a floor tilts, and she put one hand flat on the desk without noticing she'd done it. "Somebody cloned a maintenance contractor's badge and used it 4 times in 11 months, and made real sure to only use it on nights the man could not possibly account for himself except with a gas station receipt for a blue slushie." "Yes, ma'am." Park. "Ma'am, how many contractors are on this base?" 206. "And how many of them have an 11-month employment history with a hard floor under it and no life before age 27? Park checked. It took him 40 seconds. Reyes watched him do it and knew the answer before he opened his mouth because she'd been doing this for 19 years, and there was a particular kind of silence a young analyst made right before he told you something that was going to ruin your month. 1. Park said. At 6:48, Reyes picked up the phone. At 7:03, her captain, a man named Doyle, who had 8 months to retirement, and had made it extremely clear to everyone in his command that he intended to spend those 8 months not having a single interesting thing happen, listened to 60 seconds of it and said, "So he's our leak." "Sir, that's the opposite of what I said. You said his badge is in the building on nights he's not." "Sir, I said somebody else's hand was holding his badge. Or he handed it to somebody. Or he's got a partner. Or he cloned it himself and drove to a gas station to make a receipt." Doyle leaned back. "Reyes, you know what an alibi is. An alibi is what a guilty man builds on purpose." "Sir, you know how many men I've watched walk because an investigator fell in love with the elegant answer?" Reyes stood there for a second. "Sir," she said, with respect. "If I wanted to steal from this base, I would not clone the badge of the one man on this installation who everybody is already staring at. I would clone the badge of the most boring man here. I would clone yours." Doyle's face did a thing. "Get out of my office," he said. "Sir, Reyes, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying I've got a contractor with a hole in his history, 4 bad scans, and a sergeant filing reports that he's got hands like a Delta boy. That's a file. And I'd love to hand my replacement a nice, clean, closed file with a bow on it." He rubbed his eyes. "Do it properly, but do it fast." "Yes, sir." "And Reyes." He stopped her at the door. "That man's got a kid, right?" 8 years old. Doyle looked at his desk for a moment. "Do it properly," he said. At 7:15 that same morning, 14 miles away, Daniel Carter was standing at his kitchen counter losing an argument. "I'm going to school." "You're not going to school." "I'm going." "Kiddo, you've got a wrap on your arm." "It's my left arm. I write with my right arm. I read with my eyes." Daniel put down the spatula. "That's a strong argument," he admitted. "Thank you. It's still no. Dad. Lily." He turned around and leaned on the counter, and he made himself do it easy, made himself do it like a dad, and not like the other thing. "Tell me why." "Why what?" "Why you want to go, and don't say books." She stood there in the kitchen with her wrapped wrist and her cereal, and she was 8 years old, and she had her mother's flat, unimpressed face, and she said, "Because if I stay home, he wins." Daniel Carter had been in a hole in the ground, in a country he was not allowed to name for 9 days once, and he had never once wanted to cry about it. He wanted to cry about this. "Yeah," he said. Okay. Get your shoes." "That's it. I just say a good thing and I win." "That's how it works with me, kid. Say a good thing, you win. Try it on your teachers. See how far it gets you." She got her shoes. She got to the door. And then she stopped with her hand on the knob and said without turning around, "Dad, is something bad happening?" He didn't answer fast. Rule 1. "Something's happening," he said. "I don't know yet if it's bad." "Are you scared?" "No." "Should I be scared?" And Daniel Carter said the thing that he would think about later on the worst night of his life and would not be sorry for. No, he said. You've got me. At 0740. Mason Reed was summoned to Building 2. And by 0744, he understood that he was in trouble, and by 0751, he understood that he was in something much worse than trouble. Sit down, Sergeant. Ma'am? Do you know who I am? You're S2, ma'am. I'm the warrant officer who's been reading your reports. Reyes had them fanned out on the table like a bad poker hand. 4 of them in 9 days. Advanced combat reflexes. Inconsistent with civilian training. Recommend immediate revocation of access. You've got real strong handwriting for a man who throws tools at people's heads. Mason's jaw set. That's not what happened. Sergeant, there are 40 witnesses, and one of them is a private named Ellis, who apparently cannot be shut up with a crowbar. She let that sit. Now, I don't care about the wrench. Ma'am? I said I don't care about the wrench. I care about one sentence in this report, right here. You wrote, quote, subject's response indicated pre-trained threat processing. She looked up. Where'd you learn that phrase, ma'am? That's not a sergeant's phrase. That's a phrase from a briefing room. Who taught it to you? And Mason Reed opened his mouth to answer and found, and this was the first small crack, the first hairline in 18 years of concrete that he did not actually know. He said, I've heard it. Where? Around. Sergeant, around is a word men use when they don't want to say a name. It's not ma'am, I don't remember. It's a thing people say. Reyes watched him for 4 full seconds. Then she wrote something down, and Mason Reed would have given a year's pay to see what it was. Let me tell you why you're here, she said. You're here because you're the only man on this base who's been in physical proximity to Daniel Carter with hostile intent. That makes you the only man who's got real data. Everybody else has got a rumor. Mason sat up. So you agree with me? No, I said you've got data. Data's not an opinion, Sergeant. It's a number, and you don't get to have feelings about it. She slid a legal pad across the table. Write down exactly what he did, not what it meant. What he did. Where were his hands? Where was his weight? How long between the throw and the catch? He caught a wrench, ma'am. It was 1 second. How long? Mason opened his mouth, closed it. And here's the thing, he'd replayed that second maybe 400 times in 9 days, at 200 staring at his ceiling, in the shower, in his truck, at a red light, where the guy behind him honked, and he had never once, not one single time, been able to slow it down. I don't know, he said. Guess. I don't know, ma'am. It didn't have a length. Reyes stopped writing. Say that again, she said, and her voice had changed, and Mason didn't know why, and he'd wonder about it for weeks. It didn't. There wasn't a moment where he decided. That's what I'm trying to tell everybody, and nobody's listening. There wasn't a decision in it. It's like the wrench went to his hand, because it was supposed to. Reyes wrote for a long time. Ma'am, Mason said, what is he? Sergeant, if I knew that you wouldn't be in this room. Then why am I in this room? And Reyes closed her folder and gave him the only honest answer he got out of anybody that entire month. Because I've got a man I can't explain, she said, and you're the guy who poked him. And I want to know what he did when he was poked, because that tells me what he is. And right now, Sergeant, I've got exactly one data point about Daniel Carter, and it's the thing that scares me. What's that? He didn't hit you back. At 0930, they pulled his badge. Dot did it. That was the cruelty of it. They made Dot do it because Dot was the desk. And the desk did the badges, and Dot had raised 4 boys, and had a crack in her voice, and she stood there in front of a man she'd handed 640 cups of black coffee to, and said, Danny, honey, I need your badge. Daniel took it off and put it in her hand. It's not me, she said. You know it's not me. Dot, it's never been you. They're saying things. They usually are. They're saying it's you doing the computer thing. Dot's hands were shaking on the lanyard. And I said that man cannot work a phone. I said I have watched that man ask his own daughter how to send a picture. Daniel smiled. It was small, and it was real. And it was the last real one anybody on that base saw for a while. "That's true," he said. "That part's true." Danny. Dot. "Do I need to be scared of you?" And the entire room, the whole front desk, the two soldiers pretending to read the bulletin board. Everybody heard him say it, and later they all agreed. He said it exactly the same way you'd say it about the weather. "No, ma'am," Daniel said. "You've never needed to be scared of me, and you never will." "But somebody does." Daniel picked up his tool bag. "Have a good one, Dot," he said. At 11:05, they searched his truck. At 11:50, they searched it again. At 13:30, a first lieutenant with 11 months of service and a very clean uniform stood in a parking lot and told Daniel Carter in front of 9 people that his access was suspended, pending review, and that he was to remain off the installation until further notice. And Daniel said, "Yes, sir." And the lieutenant, who had been braced for an argument, actually stumbled on his next sentence. You understand what I'm telling you?" "Yes, sir." "You're not going to ask why." "Would you tell me, sir?" "No." "Then no, sir." And the lieutenant stood there with his mouth working, and Ellis, watching from the fuel point 40 yards away, said quietly to nobody at all, "That's the scariest thing I've ever seen in my life." Boyd next to him said, "He got fired, man. He just got fired." Boyd. "What?" "He got fired, and his hands didn't move." Ellis was still watching. "You ever get fired? My old man got fired from the mill in 2009. His hands moved. Everybody's hands move." At 1400, the story had gone around the whole base. At 1430, it had mutated. By 1600, it was this: the contractor was a spy. The contractor had been arrested. The contractor had 11 aliases. The contractor had killed a man in Boise. The contractor's kid wasn't even his kid. And at 1642, Tommy Reed got off the bus and told 6 children on the corner of Ash and Route 12 that Lily Carter's dad was going to jail. At 1650, Lily Carter walked into her house and put her backpack down and said, "Dad, are you going to jail?" Daniel was at the sink. He didn't turn around. "No," he said. "Tommy says, Lily." He shut the water off. "Come here." She came. "I want you to learn something today, and it's a hard one. And I'm sorry that you have to learn it at 8. He crouched. When people don't understand a man, they don't say, "I don't understand him." They say, "He's bad." Because "I don't understand" feels like being small, and "he's bad" feels like being right. Do you get that? Kind of. You'll get it more later. He tapped her chin once. "Nobody's putting me in jail." Promise. And Daniel Carter, who had never lied to his daughter, and who was 72 hours away from being in handcuffs, said, "I promise." At 2140 that night, a server closet in Building 6 opened for the 5th time. There was no badge scan. There was no door sensor event. There was no camera, because the camera in that hallway had been reporting a static frame of an empty corridor for 19 minutes and would report it for 9 more. And the man who set that up did it with the specific board competence of somebody who had done it a great many times. He was there for 6 minutes. He took nothing that would be missed by anyone who wasn't looking for it, and everyone who might have been looking for it was at that exact moment looking at Daniel Carter. Which was, of course, the entire point. At 22:10, he walked out through the loading dock, and he did one more thing before he left, which took 11 seconds and which nobody found for 4 days. He put a burner phone under the driver's seat of a truck in the contractor lot. At 4:50 the next morning, that's Thursday, and this is where it goes fast. Reyes's phone rang. "Ma'am, we've got another one." "Where?" "Building 6, same closet." Reyes was already pulling her boots on. "Carter's badge." "That's the thing, ma'am. There's no badge. There's no anything. It's cleaner than the other 4. Reyes stopped with one boot on. "Park," she said. "What time did we suspend Daniel Carter's access?" 13:30 yesterday, ma'am. And the man was 14 miles off this installation with no badge and no vehicle pass, and there's a cleaner penetration than any of the four we blamed on him. Long pause on the line. "Ma'am," Park said slowly, "are you about to say the thing I think you're about to say?" "I'm about to say it, Park." "Say it, ma'am." "We took our suspect off the board," Reyes said, "and the leak got better." At 0800, Captain Doyle refused to hear it. "Or he's got a partner." "Sir, or he set it up in advance. Or he's got a man inside doing it for him, which is exactly what a professional would do, which is exactly what you've spent a week telling me he might be." Doyle wasn't even angry. That was the worst part. He was tired. "Reyes, you're doing the thing. You're falling in love." "Sir, I have never once in 19 years. "You like him." Reyes actually laughed. "Sir, I have never met the man." "You like the shape of him. You like that he's interesting." Doyle leaned forward. "Chief, I've been in this outfit 31 years, and I'm going to give you the only thing I've got worth giving. The truth is, almost never interesting. The truth is a guy with a gambling problem. The truth is a guy whose wife's sick. The truth is boring every single time, and the day you start rooting for the truth to be interesting is the day you're not an investigator anymore, you're a fan." Reyes stood there. "Sir," she said, "permission to say one more thing." "Go." "You're right. The truth is boring." She put one photograph on his desk. "That's why I want to know why a boring man is the only person on this base with no childhood." Doyle looked at the photo for a long moment. 48 hours, he said. At 0930, Mason Reed did something he had never done in his life, which was ask a question he didn't already know the answer to. He found Ellis at the motor pool. "Private." Ellis came to attention so fast, he hit his head on the hood. "Sergeant?" "At ease. Sit down." Mason sat on a tire. Ellis stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "Your uncle, the ranger." "Yes, Sergeant." "You said he used to catch stuff." Ellis sat down very slowly. "Yes, Sergeant." "Tell me about it." And Ellis, who was 22, and who had been mocked in front of 40 men by this exact human being 9 days earlier, looked at Mason Reed's face and saw something there he had absolutely not expected to see. Which was that the man was scared. He'd catch stuff. Keys, a beer. "My cousin threw a baseball at him once as a joke, and he caught it without looking up from the paper. And we all thought it was a party trick, right? So one Thanksgiving, I asked him how he did it." Ellis picked at the tire tread. "And he got real quiet. And he said, 'Kid, you don't do it. It does you.' And then he said the part I never told anybody." "What part?" "He said, 'And you can't turn it off.'" Mason didn't move. "He said it like it was a bad thing, Sergeant. He said, 'I can't turn it off. My wife dropped a glass at the sink in 2011, and I had her on the floor with my hand on her throat before I woke up.'" Ellis swallowed. "He cried at the table. Grown man, 60 years old, silver star in a shoebox, crying at a Thanksgiving table because he can't turn it off. The motor pool made motor pool noises." "So here's my thing, Sergeant," Ellis said, and his voice was shaking a little because he knew exactly how far out on the ice he was. "Everybody's asking what Carter is. Nobody's asking the other question." "What other question?" "How hard is he working?" Mason looked up. "Sergeant, you threw a wrench at that man's head, and whatever's in him caught it. And then he put it down. He put it on the bench handle out, and he went back to a door hinge." Ellis shook his head. "My uncle couldn't do that. My uncle couldn't hear a glass drop. And you got a man who takes a wrench to the skull and says, 'You dropped this,' and goes back to work. So he's not hiding what he is, Sergeant. He's holding it." Ellis stood up. "And you've been leaning on it for 9 days. And it hasn't moved. And that don't make me feel better. That makes me feel like I'm standing next to something with a lid on it." Mason Reed sat on that tire for a long time after Ellis walked away. Then he took out his phone. He looked at it. He put it back. Then he took it out again and made a call he could not afterward explain to anybody, including himself. "Whitaker." "Mays, I'm working." You still got that pull on the personnel side. Man, I already ran him. There's nothing. I don't want him. Mason closed his eyes. I want me. Long silence. Say that again, Whitaker said. Run my file. Everything. Every report I ever filed, every counseling statement, every complaint. And Whitaker, I want to know who read them. Mays, why? And Mason Reed, standing in a motor pool in Montana, said the thing that broke his own life open. Because the S2 asked me where I learned a phrase, he said, and I couldn't remember. And I've been up all night. And Whitaker, I've been saying that phrase since July. At 1400, Reyes drove 14 miles off post and knocked on a door. Daniel opened it in a t-shirt with a dish towel over his shoulder. Mr. Carter. Ma'am, Chief Warrant Officer Reyes. I'm the S2 on that installation, and I don't have a warrant, and you don't have to talk to me, and I want to be real clear about that before you say one word. Daniel looked at her for a second. Then he said, You want coffee? Reyes had been braced for 11 different responses, and that was not one of them. Yeah, she said. Yeah, actually. Yeah. They sat at his kitchen table. There was a kid's drawing on the refrigerator and a bowl in the sink and a school schedule taped to a cabinet, and Reyes clocked all of it in about 4 seconds and hated herself a little for how normal it was. Your daughter here. School. Her arm okay? Daniel's hand stopped on the coffee pot. Just for a beat. You know about her arm, he said. Mr. Carter, I know about everything except the thing I need to know about, which is you. He poured 2 cups. He sat down. Ask, he said. Where were you born? Not gonna answer that. What did you do before Boise? Not gonna answer that. Did you serve? Not gonna answer that. Reyes nodded slowly. You understand how that looks? Ma'am, I've understood how it looks for 11 years. And there it was. Reyes caught it and didn't blink, and she'd think about it for the rest of her career. The man was so tired, so carefully tired, and he still said 11 when he'd been in Boise 12. Okay, she said. Then let me tell you what I know, and you tell me if I'm hot or cold. She put her hands flat on his table. Somebody's in my house. Been in my house a while. They're good. They're not good like a hacker's good. They're good like a man is good. They know where cameras are. They know how long a sensor buffers. They know that if you take too much, somebody counts. And 4 times in 11 months, your badge went into a room while you were buying a slushie. Daniel's coffee stopped halfway to his mouth. That was it. That was the whole tell. Half an inch of ceramic. And Elena Reyes, 19 years in, saw it, and her heart went absolutely sideways in her chest, because she had just watched a man learn something, and she had no idea which part was the new part. Mr. Carter, she said, you didn't know about the badge. No, ma'am. But you knew about the leak. Long, long silence in that kitchen. Ma'am, Daniel said, you should drink your coffee. It's better hot. Answer the question. You didn't ask one. Did you know about the leak? And Daniel Carter set his cup down and looked at her. And Reyes understood in that moment exactly what Mason Reed had been trying and failing to write on a legal pad, because the man across the table from her had not moved and had not raised his voice, and there was suddenly all the air gone out of the room. Chief, he said quietly, how long have you been at that installation? 2 years. 2 years. He nodded. And in 2 years, has anybody ever told you why a Tier 2 maintenance contract at a training facility in the middle of nowhere, Montana, went out for open bid 11 months ago, when the last guy had the contract for 19 years and was doing just fine? Reyes felt the floor tilt for the second time in 2 days. No. Huh, Daniel said, and picked his coffee back up. She was in her truck in his driveway with her hands on the wheel for 4 minutes before she could start it. And then she called Park and said 8 words that changed the whole shape of the thing. Park, pull the contract award, not the man the contract. At 15:40, Park called back, and his voice was wrong. Ma'am, the 19-year guy, Ostrowski Ray. He didn't lose the bid. Then what happened? He withdrew, ma'am. Voluntarily. On July 8th of last year. So on July 6th of last year, somebody in this building pulled Ray Ostrowski's entire personnel file, his contract, his financials, and his family's addresses. Park was breathing funny. And 2 days later, a man with 19 years and a clean record walked away from a $200,000 a year contract and moved to Arizona. Reyes closed her eyes. Who pulled the file? That's the thing, ma'am. The access log's clean. It's beautiful. It's got a name and a badge and a timestamp, and everything's perfect. Whose name, Park? And Park said it. It's yours, ma'am. At 1600 in a room in Building 2, Chief Warrant Officer Elena Reyes sat down very slowly in a chair and understood that she had been being fitted for a suit for 14 months and that Daniel Carter was not the suspect. Daniel Carter was the decoy, and she was the tailor's dummy. At 16:20, Mason Reed called her. She almost didn't pick up. "Sergeant, this is a bad time." "Ma'am?" Mason's voice was strange, flat, far away. "You asked me where I learned that phrase." Reyes sat up. "Pre-trained threat processing," Mason said. "I couldn't remember, so I had a guy pull my own file." "Ma'am, I've filed 4 reports on Carter in 9 days, right?" "4. "Yes." "I've filed 11 since July." Silence. 11, ma'am. On 6 different guys. And every single one of them uses language I don't use. And I read them back, and I don't remember writing 3 of them, and I've been sitting in my truck for 2 hours trying to figure out how a man doesn't remember writing his own reports." "Sergeant, and then I remembered." Mason laughed, and it was an awful sound. "I didn't write 'em. I dictated 'em. Every time. I'd get worked up about some guy, and I'd say it out loud, and he'd say, 'Mays, you should put that in writing. I'll type it, you just sign it.' And I'd sign it. Because I'm not a writer, ma'am. I'm a mouth. Everybody knows that." Reyes was standing now. "Sergeant Reed," she said. "Say his name." "Ma'am, he's my friend. He's been my friend for 6 years. He's the godfather to my—" "Say his name." And Mason Reed said it. "Whitaker," he said. "Staff Sergeant Ted Whitaker, personnel." At 16:22, the burner phone under the driver's seat of Daniel Carter's truck received its first and only text message, and it went to a number nobody was supposed to have, and it said one word: tonight. At 16:24, Reyes shouted for Park. At 16:25, Park said the sentence that emptied the building. Ma'am, Whitaker badged out at 16:08. "And ma'am, he pulled a work order 15 minutes ago. It's stamped urgent. It's for a contractor callback." "Which contractor?" Park looked up. "Carter," he said. "Somebody just called Daniel Carter back onto this base." At 16:31, 14 miles away, Daniel Carter's phone rang. He looked at it for 3 rings. Lily was at the table with her homework and her wrapped wrist, and she looked up and said, "Dad, you gonna get that?" And Daniel Carter looked at his daughter and looked at the phone, and something went through his face that she had never seen before and would never forget, a thing that arrived and settled and made him for 1 second into somebody else entirely. Somebody calm in a way that wasn't calm at all. "Kiddo," he said, "get your shoes." "Why?" "Because we're gonna go stay at Mrs. Halloran's tonight, and you're gonna read her that book, and she's gonna love it." "Dad," shoes Lily. She got up, she got to the door, and then she turned around the way she always turned around and asked the question she'd been holding in her mouth since a parking lot 10 days ago. "Dad, the thing you're hiding." Daniel picked up the phone. "Is it going to hurt us?" And Daniel Carter said no. Then he answered the call and put it to his ear and said in the voice of a tired maintenance man who fixed hinges and lost arguments about slushy change, "This is Carter." And a voice on the other end said, "Hey, Danny, it's Ted Whitaker over in personnel. Listen, I hate to do this to you, buddy. I know they suspended you. I'm trying to get that fixed. But we got a boiler alarm in 9, and you're the only guy who's ever gotten that thing to run, and my captain is chewing on my leg here. Building 9. Building 9. Can you come 20 minutes? I'll walk you in myself. I'll escort you the whole way. I'll sign for you personally. Nobody's gonna hassle you. I swear on my life." Daniel Carter looked out his kitchen window at 11 years of a life he had built out of nothing, brick by brick, on purpose for her. "Yeah, Ted," he said. "I'll be there in 20. He hung up. He stood in his kitchen for exactly 4 seconds. Then he walked out to the shed and unlocked it and moved a shelf that was not a shelf and pulled up a floorboard, and this time he opened the case. At 16:37 on Thursday, Daniel Carter knelt in a shed in Montana with a metal case open in front of him, and inside that case there was not a single weapon. There was a camera with a long lens and 11 months of frames on it. There were 4 spiral notebooks, the cheap kind, the kind you buy at a grocery store, filled front to back in small block handwriting that never once slanted. There was a hard drive in a plastic bag. There was a challenge coin worn smooth on one face that he did not touch. There was a hospital bracelet with a woman's name on it, and he did not touch that either. And on top of everything, in a paper sleeve, there were 11 photographs of the same man, walking out of the same loading dock at the same time of night. And every single one of them had been taken by a maintenance contractor who was standing exactly where a maintenance contractor was supposed to be standing. Daniel took the notebooks. He took the drive. He left the camera. He closed the case, put it back in the hole, put the floorboard back, and he did not look at the bracelet because he had a rule about that, and the rule was that he was allowed to look at it when it was over. It was not over. At 16:44, he was in the truck with Lily and her overnight bag and her library book, and she was buckled in, and she had not said a word for 2 minutes, which for Lily Carter was a geological event. "Kiddo, you're doing the thing." "What thing?" "The voice thing." She was looking straight ahead. "You do a voice when you don't want me to be scared. It's slower. You did it when Grandma died." Daniel drove. "You're right," he said. "I'm doing the voice." "Why?" "Because I don't want you to be scared." "That's a dumb reason." "That's a great reason. It's the best reason there is." She turned her head then and looked at him, and her chin was doing the thing. "Dad, if I'm going to be scared anyway," she said, "can I at least be scared with the real voice?" And Daniel Carter drove 400 yards down a gravel road without saying anything because he could not. "Okay," he said finally, and his voice came out different. Lower, flatter, older. Real voice. "Okay. Tonight I have to go do something at the base, and it's a job I don't want, and I'm going to do it anyway, and I'm going to be home before you wake up." That's the real voice. Lily thought about it. "Is somebody going to hurt you?" "They're going to try." She went white. And then, because she was her mother's child, she got mad instead. "Then don't go." "Lily, that's the whole thing. You just don't go. You said say a good thing and I win. So that's my good thing. Don't go." Daniel pulled over. Same shoulder, same gravel road. 11 days later. "Lily, look at me." He turned in the seat. "Remember when I said there's 2 kinds of nobody?" "Yes. There's also 2 kinds of running." He held up one hand. "There's running so nobody finds you. I did that for a long time. It worked." He held up the other. "And there's running because you're scared. And the second one doesn't work. Ever. Because you gotta take you with you." She was crying now, silently furious about it. "Kiddo, I ran the good kind for 11 years, and I built you a whole life out of it, and I'd do it again. But tonight if I run, I'd be running the second kind." He put his hand on the back of her head. "And you'd know. Maybe not this year. But you'd know eventually, and you'd look at me, and you'd know." "I wouldn't." "You'd know, kid. You read at a 6th grade level." She laughed. It broke in half and came out as a sob, and she hit him in the shoulder with her good hand, and Daniel Carter took it, and then she grabbed a fistful of his shirt and held on. "Come back." "Yes." "Say it like a promise." "I promise." At 17:01, Beth Halloran opened her front door and found an 8-year-old with a library book and a man she had been thinking about for 10 days. "Mr. Carter?" "Ma'am, I need a favor, and I don't have any right to ask it." "Ask it. Can she stay the night?" Beth Halloran had been a principal for 31 years. She had seen every kind of parent there was to see, and she had a filing system in her head, and she had never once in 3 decades needed a new folder. She looked at Daniel Carter's face and made a new folder. "Yes," she said. "You didn't ask why. Mr. Carter, I've got 2 questions and neither one of them is why." She stepped back to let Lily in. Question 1. Am I keeping her safe from something, or am I just keeping her? You're just keeping her. Is that true? Ma'am, if it wasn't true, I wouldn't leave her here. Beth nodded once slowly. Question 2, she said. Are you coming back? And Daniel Carter said, Yes, ma'am. And Beth Halloran, who had been married to a firefighter for 29 years, heard that exact tone and knew exactly what it was worth, which was not nothing and not everything. Then I'll leave the porch light on, she said. And Mr. Carter, whatever it is, she thinks you fix things. Yes, ma'am. So go fix it. At 1712, Chief Warrant Officer Elena Reyes was doing 85 in a government sedan and screaming into a phone. Park, where's Whitaker? Ma'am, he badged out at 1608. He hasn't badged back in. He doesn't need to badge in Park. He's the man who makes the badges. She took a curve too hard. Where's the work order? Building 9 boiler alarm, priority urgent escort assigned. Who's the escort? That's, ma'am, the escort field says Whitaker. He assigned himself. He assigned himself. Reyes hit the brakes so hard the sedan slid. Park, listened to me very carefully. A boiler alarm in 9. Is there a boiler alarm in 9 keys? Fast keys. Ma'am, Park said, and his voice had gone thin. Facilities shows no alarm in Building 9. No alarm in the last 30 days. The boiler in 9 is running fine. It's running fine because Carter fixed it 8 days ago. Ma'am, he built a work order for a machine that isn't broken, Reyes said, so he could walk a man into an empty building alone at night. And Park, I want you to hear me say this out loud, so that when they ask you later, you can tell them exactly when I knew. Whitaker isn't running. Whitaker's setting a table. At 1724, Mason Reed was standing in his own kitchen, and his wife was staring at him, and his son was in the doorway. Say that again, Karen said. I gotta go. Mason, you're shaking. I'm not shaking. Your hands are shaking. Your hands have never shaken. Not when your dad died, not when Tommy was in the NICU. She grabbed his wrist. What did you do? And Sergeant Mason Reed, who had spent 18 years making sure that no human being on earth ever saw him be anything but the biggest thing in the room, looked at his wife and said, I think I hurt a man for 6 years for a guy who was using me like a screwdriver. Karen let go of his wrist. Ted? Mason, he was at Tommy's christening. I know. He fixed our transmission. Karen, I know. Mason put his hands flat on the counter to stop them. Every guy I ever went after. Every single one. You know how it went? I'd come home and I'd be hot about somebody, and I'd call Ted and Ted'd say, Man, that guy's a problem, you should say something. And I'd say something. And Ted'd say, Let me type it up for you. Mace, you know you can't spell. And I'd laugh. And I'd sign it. So I've been the loudest man on that base for 6 years. He looked up. And every time somebody started looking at something Ted didn't want, looked at, there was Mason Reed screaming his head off about a totally different guy. Karen, I wasn't the bully. Mason, I was the noise, Tommy said from the doorway. Dad. And Mason turned around and looked at his 8-year-old son and thought about a little girl with a wrapped wrist and about the word traitor coming out of his own mouth at this exact counter with this exact kid 12 feet away, and something in Mason Reed's chest came apart with an almost audible sound. Bud, he said, I gotta tell you something, and it's gonna take a long time, and I'm gonna tell you all of it when I get home. But right now, I need you to hear one part. Okay, that girl, Lily Carter. Yeah. Her dad's not a traitor. Mason's voice broke clean in half. Her dad might be the best man on that whole base, and I threw a wrench at his head. At 1740, Daniel Carter's truck stopped at the gate. The kid on the gate was 19 and had heard every rumor there was. "Sir, your access is suspended." "Yes." "So I can't—" "There's a work order. Escort's meeting me." The kid looked at his screen, looked at it again, and then he did the thing that Daniel had been waiting 11 months for somebody to do, which was frown. "Sir, this is stamped by personnel." "Yes." "Work orders don't come from personnel. They come from facilities." Daniel Carter looked at that 19-year-old kid, and he smiled, and it was the first genuine smile since Dot. "What's your name, son?" "Private Nguyen, sir." "Nguyen, in about 4 hours. A lot of people are going to ask you why you let me through. And you're going to tell them the truth, which is that a suspended contractor showed up with a valid electronic work order and a signed escort, and you followed procedure." He put his truck in gear. "But I want you to remember that you noticed. You're the only man on this installation who noticed. Don't let anybody take that from you." He drove through. Nguyen sat in that shack with his heart going about 900 beats a minute, and at 17:43, he did the single most important thing anybody did that night, which was pick up a phone and call his sergeant of the guard and say, "Sergeant, I think I just did something wrong." At 17:46, Ted Whitaker was standing outside Building 9 with 2 coffees. That was the part Daniel would think about later. 2 coffees. "Danny?" Whitaker came off the wall grinning and handed one over and clapped him on the shoulder, and it was warm, and it was easy, and it was 6 years of practice. "Man, I owe you. I owe you huge. My captain's been up my—" "You said facilities called you." "Huh. On the phone. You said your captain was chewing on your leg." Daniel took the coffee. "Your personnel, Ted." "Half a beat, half. Man, everybody's chewing on everybody's leg around here." Whitaker laughed. "You want the tour? Come on. I'll walk you in. I told you I'd walk you in." They walked in. At 17:51, Reyes hit the gate at 70, and Nguyen was already standing in the road with his hands up. Ma'am, there's a contractor. Carter." "Yes, ma'am, 4 minutes ago, and ma'am, the work order came from personnel, and I don't think Nguyen." Reyes leaned out. "Building 9. Who else went in?" "Nobody, ma'am. Just Staff Sergeant Whitaker." "When?" "He never left, ma'am. He's been on the installation since—" Nguyen checked. "Ma'am, his badge shows him leaving at 16:08. "Did you see him leave?" Long pause. "No, ma'am." Reyes closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. "He badged out and stayed in," she said. "He's been sitting in a building for 2 hours with no one knowing he's on the base." At 17:54, inside Building 9, Ted Whitaker stopped at the bottom of the stairwell and said, "Hey, Danny, hold up a sec." Daniel stopped. "Look, man, I gotta say something, and it's awkward." Whitaker rubbed the back of his neck. He did it beautifully. "This whole thing with you. The badge, the suspension. I've been the guy pulling your file for Mason, and I feel like garbage about it, and I want you to know I never believed any of it." "That's decent of you, Ted. I mean it. You got a kid. I got a kid." Whitaker shook his head. "I keep thinking about your little girl's arm." And Daniel Carter said very pleasantly, "How'd you know about her arm?" "Nothing moved in that stairwell." "Mason told me," Whitaker said. "Mason wasn't there when she got hurt. Mason came to the parking lot at pickup 40 minutes after, and Mason never saw the wrap because I was standing between him and the truck." Daniel took a sip of the coffee. "So how'd you know about her arm, Ted?" Ted Whitaker looked at him for a long moment. Then he smiled, and the smile changed, and it was like watching a man take off a coat. "You know," Whitaker said, "I've been doing this a long time, and I gotta tell you, Danny, nobody's ever caught me on a sentence before." "I know. 11 months you've been here." "Yes." "Fixing hinges." "Yes." Whitaker's smile got wider, and he shook his head slowly, almost admiring, almost fond. "You're not a contractor," he said. And Daniel Carter set his coffee down on the stair rail, and he said, in that same tired, ordinary voice, "Neither are you." At 17:57, Reyes's sedan came through the housing loop at 90, and Mason Reed's truck came out of a side street and nearly took her front quarter off, and both vehicles stopped nose to nose, and Mason was out and running before his door shut. "Ma'am, get in." "Ma'am, I gotta tell you." "Sergeant, get in the car or get out of my road." Mason got in. Reyes drove. "Whitaker's in 9, she said. "So's Carter." Mason's whole body went rigid. "Ma'am, he's gonna kill him." "Sergeant, you don't get it. Ted's not a paper guy. Everybody thinks Ted's a paper guy." Mason was talking too fast. "Ted did 4 years as an 18 Bravo before he reclassed. Ted's got a bad back and a fake laugh and a wall full of nothing, and I've been drinking beer with that man for 6 years, and ma'am, I have never once, not one time, seen him lose his temper." So everybody loses their temper," Mason shouted. "I lose mine 40 times a day. Boyd loses his. The chaplain loses his 6 years, and I never saw that man's face change, and I thought it was because he was nice." Reyes took a corner. "Sergeant," she said, "how far to 9? 2 minutes. Make it 1. At 1758 in the stairwell. Ted Whitaker said, Okay, let's just do this like grown-ups." "Sure. How much do you have?" 11 months. "How much of it's on paper?" "All of it." "Where?" Daniel didn't answer. Whitaker nodded like a man hearing an expected price. "See, that's the problem," he said. "'Cause here's my read on you, Danny. You're not a cop. Cops don't spend 11 months building a case and then hand their badge to a lady named Dot. Cops bring warrants." He put his hands in his pockets. "You're a guy with a hole where his history's supposed to be doing this by yourself off the books for 11 months and you didn't call anybody, not once." "That's right, which means either you can't." Whitaker rocked back on his heels. "Or you're not here for the case." Daniel said nothing. "There it is," Whitaker said softly. "That's the one. You're not here for the case. No. You're here for a guy." "Yes." Whitaker laughed, and it was the first real thing that came out of him all night. "Danny," he said. "Buddy, I'm a courier. You know how much I make? 14 grand a year for this. 14. I'm not a guy. I'm not even a name. I'm a hand." He spread his fingers. "You spent 11 months in a boiler room for a hand." "I spent 11 months, Daniel said, waiting for the hand to reach for something. And then he said the sentence that Ted Whitaker did not survive. "Ray Ostrowski," Daniel said. Whitaker's face went absolutely blank. 19 years on this contract, Daniel said. "Good man. Grandkids." Somebody pulled his file on July 6th, his financials, his family's addresses, and on July 8th, he withdrew. Daniel took one step down. "You want to know why he withdrew, Ted?" "Why?" "Because on July 7th, a man came to his house at 11 at night and sat in his kitchen and told him exactly what would happen to his daughter in Tucson if he didn't take a package once a month." Whitaker's jaw moved. And then, Daniel said, on July 7th at 2 in the morning, a second man came to Ray Ostrowski's house. Silence in that stairwell you could have leaned on. And that second man told Ray Ostrowski to withdraw the bid move to Arizona and never say a word to anybody ever for the rest of his life. Another step down. And Ray said, "They'll just find another guy." And the second man said, "I know, I'm counting on it." Ted Whitaker's mouth opened. "You," he said. "You didn't take the contract from Ray Ostrowski, Ted," Daniel said. "I gave it to you." At 1801, Reyes's sedan came off the road and onto the grass and stopped 40 feet from the Building 9 door. At 1802, Mason Reed put his shoulder through a door that wasn't locked and fell into a hallway. At 1802 and 11 seconds, everybody in that stairwell heard everybody else. And Ted Whitaker made his decision. He went for Daniel's throat, and he went fast. And he went the way a man goes when he has been trained by the United States government and has been pretending for 6 years to be a guy with a bad back who types other men's reports, and it was by any honest measure an extraordinarily good attempt. It lasted a second and a half. Mason Reed came around the corner into that stairwell at a dead sprint and stopped so hard he hit the wall and Reyes came in behind him with her hand on her sidearm, and both of them saw the end of it, and neither of them ever agreed on what they saw. Ted Whitaker was on the floor on his stomach, and his arm was up behind him at an angle. Arms don't go. And Daniel Carter had one knee on his back and one hand flat on the back of Whitaker's neck, and Daniel Carter wasn't breathing hard. That was the part Mason couldn't get past. For years, the man wasn't breathing hard. "Chief," Daniel said without looking up, "there's a thumb drive in his left sock." Nobody moved. "Chief." "Yeah," Reyes said. "Left sock." Reyes came forward and pulled up Ted Whitaker's pant leg, and there was a thumb drive in his left sock. At 18:04, Ted Whitaker started laughing into the floor. "Danny," he wheezed. "Danny, Danny, Danny, you beautiful lunatic. 11 months. Ted. 11 months for a hand. Ted. "I'm going to ask you a question," Daniel said. "And you should answer it, because in about 90 seconds, this building's going to be full of people who will not let me ask it again." "Ask." "Who do you give it to?" And Ted Whitaker turned his face sideways against the floor and looked up at the man kneeling on his spine, and he grinned with his teeth all bloody, and he said, "Ghost Wolf." Mason Reed said, "What?" Reyes said, "What did you say?" And Daniel Carter's hand did not move on the back of Whitaker's neck, but something went out of his face, and Reyes saw it go, and it was the only time in 19 years she'd ever watched a man get hit without being touched. "Say it again," Daniel said. "That's the name on it." Whitaker was laughing and coughing at the same time. "That's the name on the routing. 11 years, buddy. Every package I ever moved, every file, every drop, it all routes under one call sign. And I never met him, and I never will, and I don't even know if he's real. He's real. And it's Ghost Wolf." Whitaker's whole body shook with it. "And you know what's funny? You know what's funny, Danny? I got told 6 months ago the man's been dead for 11 years, and somebody's just been using his name." At 18:06, Chief Warrant Officer Elena Reyes said very quietly into a stairwell, "Mr. Carter, why aren't you surprised?" Daniel let go of Whitaker's arm. He stood up. Slow. And Mason Reed, standing 11 feet away with his hand on the wall, watched a maintenance contractor stand up in a stairwell and understood that he had never in his entire life actually seen this man before. "Chief," Daniel said, "you asked me in my kitchen if I served. You said you wouldn't answer. I'm answering." At 18:07, Daniel Carter said 7 words, and Mason Reed's legs stopped working right and he had to sit down on a stair. "That call sign is mine," Daniel said. "It's been mine since 2009. Nobody breathed. "For 11 years, somebody has been selling this country's people out from under this country's nose," Daniel said. "And every time money moved, it moved under a dead man's name. Because a dead man can't complain. Because a dead man's file is sealed by 3 agencies. Because if the whole thing ever came apart, there's a legend at the bottom of it with no birth certificate and no service record and no anything. And every investigator on Earth would follow it straight down that hole and hit the floor and stop. Because there's nothing under it," Reyes whispered. "There's nothing under it. You're the fall guy." "Chief," Daniel said, "I've been the fall guy since before you enlisted." At 18:08, Mason Reed said from the stair in a voice like a kid's, "How'd you find out?" And Daniel Carter turned and looked at him. At Mason Reed, the man who threw the wrench, the man who called him a mascot in front of 40 people, the man whose son had pushed his daughter off a bleacher, and he answered him. Straight, like he was owed it. "6 years ago my wife was dying," Daniel said. "And a man came to the hospital, and he sat in the chair by her bed, and he told me he was from the department, and he said there'd been an inquiry. And he said, 'Your name keeps coming up, Mr. Carter, and I need you to understand that if you ever surface, we will have to put you in a room and ask you about 11 years of transactions you have no memory of.'" Mason said, "Jesus." And my wife was asleep. And I said, "I've been out for 5 years. And he said, "I know. That's what makes it work." Daniel's voice did not change once, not 1 degree. And then he stood up and he looked at my wife and he said, "She's got what, a month?" and he said, "You've got a little girl." And then he left. Reyes had her hand over her mouth. "He didn't threaten me, Chief," Daniel said. "He didn't have to. He just told me the weather." "So what did you do?" Mason said. "I sat there for 11 days until she died," Daniel said. "And I made her a promise. And then I put my daughter in a truck and I went and became nobody, and I stayed nobody for 5 years while I found out who owned that hospital chair. And it took me 5 years to find a thread. And the thread was a maintenance contract at a training facility in Montana." Ted Whitaker on the floor said, "You gotta be kidding me." "And I gave that contract to you, Ted," Daniel said, "because I needed a hand I could watch." At 1810, the doors came open at both ends of that hallway, and it stopped being anybody's conversation. There were 9 of them. Then 14. There was a lieutenant and a first sergeant, and 2 MPs, and a man in a suit whose face Reyes did not know, and the man in the suit had been on the installation for 40 minutes, which was 11 minutes before anybody in that building had made a single call. Reyes clocked it. She clocked it in the first 2 seconds, and she filed it, and she did not say one word about it for 6 days. "Hands!" Somebody was screaming. "Hands!" Daniel Carter put his hands out from his body and got down on his knees on the floor of that stairwell without being told twice. "That's the guy!" Mason was up shouting in somebody's face. "That's the guy on the floor, that's Whitaker. He's got a drive in his sock." "Sergeant, back up. He's got a drive in his sock, you're cuffing the wrong." Sergeant Reed, back up. And Mason Reed, who had spent 18 years being the biggest voice in every room he ever walked into, discovered in 1 single second what it feels like to be loud and have it mean absolutely nothing. And he stood there in that hallway with his mouth open and his face wet, and he was for the first time in his adult life completely powerless. At 1812, they put Daniel Carter in handcuffs. He didn't resist, he didn't argue. He let them do it, and he looked up once, and he found Reyes in the crowd, and he said 4 words to her over the noise. "Chief, Ray Ostrowski, Tucson." "Mr. Carter?" "Say it back." "Ray Ostrowski, Tucson." "He'll be dead in a week." At 1813, the man in the suit crouched down in front of Daniel Carter and looked at him with what appeared to be, and Reyes would swear to this later, under oath, genuine warmth. "Mr. Carter," he said, "you've been a very hard man to find." And Daniel Carter looked up at him, and he smiled that same small, tired, apologetic smile, the one he'd given Mason Reed in a hangar over a wrench 11 days ago. "No, I haven't," he said. "I've been in Montana. You sat in a chair next to my wife." The man in the suit did not move. He did not blink. But Elena Reyes was standing 4 feet behind him, and she watched the back of that man's neck, and the back of that man's neck went red. And Reyes had been doing this for 19 years. And she knew exactly one thing about human beings that had never once failed her. And it was this: a man who has never met you does not blush when you accuse him. They walked Daniel Carter out of Building 9 at 1816. Mason Reed followed them all the way to the vehicle, past the MPs, past the lieutenant telling him to stand down, past his own career going out the window in real time. And at the door of that vehicle, he grabbed the frame with both hands and said the only thing he had left. "Carter, Carter." Daniel looked at him. "Your girl," Mason said. "Where's your girl?" And that was the moment. That was the one. Ask anybody who was in that lot. Daniel Carter in handcuffs, in the door of a vehicle with 14 men around him, and 11 years of his life coming apart, stopped and looked at Sergeant Mason Reed, and his face changed. And it was not the flat thing, and it was not the tired thing. It was terror. Pure, plain, ordinary terror, and it was the first honest human expression anybody on that base had ever seen on the man, and it lasted about a second and a half. "Halloran," he said. "Beth Halloran, 12 Ash Street." "Okay." "Mason." Daniel's voice cracked wide open. "Mason." I'm going right now. They know she's mine." And the door shut. Mason Reed stood in that parking lot for 1 second, maybe 2. Then he ran. He ran past his truck and got in it, and he was doing 60 inside the wire and 80 on Route 12, and he blew the gate so hard that Private Nguyen had to jump. And Mason Reed, 41 years old. 2 deployments, 18 years of being the meanest man on a base in Montana, was crying so hard he could barely see the road, and he was saying the same thing over and over into his own windshield. Please, please, please. He hit Ash Street at 1834. The porch light was on, and the front door was standing open. At 1834 and 40 seconds, Mason Reed came through Beth Halloran's open front door with his hands empty and his heart going like a jackhammer. And the first thing he heard was a woman's voice from the kitchen saying, "Robert, I'm telling you I do not need a hand with the—" He stopped so fast he nearly went down. Beth Halloran came around the corner with a dish towel and a phone against her ear and looked at a 41-year-old man standing in her entryway with tears all over his face. "Hold on, Robert," she said, and then to Mason, "Who are you? Where is she? Who are you? Where is she?" And a small voice from the top of the stairs said, "Mrs. Halloran, is that Tommy's dad?" Mason Reed looked up. Lily Carter was standing at the top of the stairs in somebody's borrowed sweatshirt, with her wrist in a wrap and a library book in her good hand. And she was alive, and she was 8, and she was looking at him with her father's flat, patient, mile-deep eyes. Mason put both hands on the newel post, because his legs had quit. "The door," he said. The door was open. "The dog?" Beth Halloran said. "I let the dog out. Sir, you have about 4 seconds to tell me who you are before I finish dialing 911, and I want you to know I've already got the 9. "Reed," Mason said. "Mason Reed." Beth Halloran's face changed. "You're Tommy's father." "Yes, ma'am." "You're the man who—" She stopped herself, and her jaw set, and 31 years of principle came down on him like a garage door. "Get out of my house." "Ma'am, get out of my house right now." "Ma'am, they took him." The dish towel stopped moving. "What?" "They took Daniel Carter." Mason's voice went to pieces. 20 minutes ago. They put him in a vehicle, and he looked at me and he said, 'They know she's mine, and I have been doing 80 on Route 12 for 11 miles, and I need you to lock your door.'" Lily came down 2 steps. "Mister," she said, "where's my dad?" And Mason Reed, who had thrown a wrench at that girl's father's head, who had said the word traitor in his own kitchen, where his own son could hear it, who had spent 9 days trying to break a man for the crime of being quiet, got down on one knee at the bottom of a stranger's staircase, so an 8-year-old wouldn't have to look up at him. "He's in trouble," Mason said, "and it's not because he did anything wrong, and a lot of it's my fault. Are you going to help him?" "Yes." "Do you promise?" And Mason Reed said, "Yeah, kid, I promise," and had absolutely no idea how he was going to do it. At 1841, Beth Halloran locked her door and drew every curtain in the house, and made Mason Reed sit at her kitchen table and put a cup of coffee in front of him that he did not drink. "Talk," she said. "Ma'am, you don't want—" "Sir, there is a child upstairs in my guest room, and her father handed her to me 4 hours ago and asked me a question I have been chewing on ever since." Beth sat down across from him. "He asked if I was keeping her safe from something, or just keeping her, and he said just keeping her. And he looked me in the eye when he said it." "He lied." "No." Beth's voice was iron. "He didn't. That man does not lie. He withholds, which is a different animal entirely, and I have been reading parents for 3 decades, and I know the difference." She leaned forward. "He believed it when he said it. So what changed between 5 o'clock and now?" And Mason Reed opened his mouth to say, "I don't know," and instead heard himself say something else entirely. "He found out who they are," he said. At 1847, 14 miles away, Chief Warrant Officer Elena Reyes was standing in a hallway, watching a man in a suit take over her investigation with a politeness that made her want to put her fist through drywall. Chief Reyes. He had a card. Of course he had a card. "Marcus Dean, I'm with the department." "Which department?" He smiled. "Sir, that's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got, Chief." Then here's mine. Reyes did not take the card. Where's my prisoner? Mr. Whitaker's in medical. Not Whitaker. Carter. Dean's eyebrows went up about a millimeter. Mr. Carter's being transported. To where? Chief. To where, sir? Because I've got a detained civilian who was picked up on my installation on my watch, and there's a log, and the log has a destination field, and the destination field has to say something. It says federal. That's not a place. Chief Reyes. Dean's voice never rose. It never did. You've had a very long week. You broke a 14-month penetration in 9 days. I've read your file, and I'd like you to know that people considerably above me have read it too, and the word being used is exceptional. He put the card on the counter next to her. Go home. Sleep. This part isn't yours. And Elena Reyes said, Yes, sir, and watched him walk away. And then she picked up his card and looked at it, and it had a name and a number and nothing else. No agency, no seal, no address, and she stood in that hallway for 11 seconds, with her whole 19-year career sitting on a scale in her chest. Then she went and found Park. Ma'am? Park, how fast can you pull a gate log? Ma'am, they told us to stand down. They took the servers. Park. Reyes grabbed his shoulder. The gate log, not the network. The gate. That's a different system. It's owned by facilities. It runs on a box in a shed. And I am willing to bet you $11 that the man in the suit does not know it exists, because nobody in a suit has ever once cared about a shed. Park stared at her. 30 seconds, ma'am. At 1851, Park said, Oh no. Say it. Ma'am, Marcus Dean badged onto this installation at 1727. Reyes closed her eyes. That's before Nguyen called, she said. That's before Nguyen called. That's before anybody called. Ma'am, that's before Carter got here. Park's hands were shaking on the keys. He was already on the base. He was sitting on the base waiting for it. Park. Ma'am, print it. Print the whole log on paper on that garbage printer nobody's used since 2019, and then take the paper and put it somewhere that is not this building. And Park, look at me. Reyes turned him around. Don't tell me where. Ma'am, don't tell me where, Park. That's the point. At 1855, a phone rang at a kitchen table in a house on Ash Street, and it was Mason Reed's phone, and the screen said, Karen. He almost didn't answer. Baby, I'm in the middle of... Mason? His wife's voice was wrong. There's a car. Everything in Mason Reed went very still. Where? Across from the house. It's been there since like 6, and I wouldn't have even noticed except Tommy said something. She was whispering. He said, Mom, why's that guy been eating the same sandwich for an hour? Karen. Mason, who is that? Take Tommy and go to your sister's. He was already standing. Right now. Out the back. Leave the lights on. Leave the TV on. Don't pack. Don't get in your car. Go through the Delaney's yard and out onto Birch, and have your sister pick you up on Birch. Mason, you're scaring me. Karen, I've never asked you for anything like this in 11 years of marriage. Silence. I'm scared, she said. I know. Are you going to tell me what you did? And Mason Reed, standing in a stranger's kitchen with a dead man's daughter upstairs, said, I told the truth about a friend. At 1859, Karen Reed went through the Delaney's yard with her son's hand in hers, and her shoes in the other, and the man in the car across the street watched her go, and did not follow, because he was not there for Karen Reed. He was there so that Mason Reed would know he could be. At 1903, in a room with no windows that was 11 minutes off the installation, and was not by any definition anyone would later be able to defend a jail. Daniel Carter sat at a metal table with his hands cuffed in front of him and looked at Marcus Dean. You want water? No, thank you. Coffee? No, thank you. Dean sat down. He was very good at sitting down. He did it like a man visiting a friend in a hospital. You look older, he said. It's been 6 years. 6 years. Dean shook his head slowly. I want to say something, and I want to say it before anything else because I've thought about it a great deal. I'm sorry about your wife." Daniel Carter said nothing. "I mean that. I've got a wife. She's had her own anyway." Dean waved a hand. "I know how it sounded in that room. I know what you think I was doing. And I've replayed it, and I'd do it different now, and I'm not going to insult you by saying I wouldn't." "You'd do what different?" "The part about your daughter." "Ah. I shouldn't have mentioned her." Dean spread his hands, rueful, reasonable, a man being honest with an old colleague. "It was heavy-handed. I was younger. Look, you were a dangerous man in a hospital room with nothing left to lose, and I had about 90 seconds to make sure you understood the shape of the thing, and I used the wrong lever. That's on me." Daniel Carter watched him. "You want to know something, Mr. Dean?" "Please." "You just did it again." Dean's face didn't move. "You just spent 40 seconds apologizing," Daniel said, "and the only thing you actually said was my daughter's name." At 19:06, Marcus Dean laughed out loud, and it was the realest thing in the room. "God," he said, "you know I've read every page of you there is, which isn't many, and I still wasn't ready. Okay, fine. Let's do it your way." He folded his hands. "Here's the situation. There's a thumb drive. There's a man named Whitaker in a hospital bed with a broken arm. There's a chief warrant officer with a whiteboard. And there's you, a man with no birth certificate, no service record, no fingerprints in any system I'm allowed to name, kneeling on a soldier's spine in a federal building at 18:02 on a Thursday. That's the situation. So let me ask you the only question that matters." Dean leaned in. "What do you want?" And Daniel Carter said, "I want you to say the name." "Which name?" "The one on the routing." Dean sat back. "Ghost Wolf," he said. "That's my call sign." "I'm aware." "Say the next part." Dean was quiet for a moment. Then he said almost gently, "You want me to admit that we've been running your name as a routing identifier for 11 years?" "Yes." "Why, you already know." "Because I want to hear a man say it out loud." Daniel said, "One time in a room with a camera in the corner before I decide what kind of man I'm going to be tonight." At 19:08, Marcus Dean looked up at the camera in the corner. And then he did something that Daniel Carter had not planned for, and there had not been very many of those in 11 years. He reached up and he unplugged it. "There," he said, sitting back down. "Now let's talk like men." At 19:09, Daniel Carter's hands, cuffed on the table, opened once and closed once. That was all. That was the whole reaction. But if Mason Reed had been in that room, he'd have recognized it instantly, because it was the exact same movement a man makes at the top of a stairwell about a second and a half before the other man goes to the floor. "Mr. Carter," Dean said. "Yes, we used your name." "Say all of it." "In 2009, you completed an operation that 11 people knew about, and 9 of them are dead of natural causes, and afterward your file was sealed by 3 agencies. And when a file gets sealed like that, it becomes something very rare and very useful, which is a clean identity that nobody is allowed to look at." Dean shrugged. "So somebody used it. Not me. I was a GS9 in 2009. I was buying my first house. Somebody above me looked at a sealed drawer and thought, that's a hell of a drawer. And for 11 years, every dirty dollar that moved through this program moved under Ghost Wolf, and it worked beautifully. Mr. Carter, and I want you to understand that it worked beautifully because of you, because of how good you were, because the men who built that seal built it to protect you, and every single lock they turned to keep you safe turned into a wall that kept anybody from ever looking underneath." Daniel said, "And the men who died?" "There were men who died." "How many?" "That's not..." "How many?" At 19:12, Marcus Dean said the number. 19. Nothing happened in that room for 4 full seconds. "Assets," Dean said. "Not Americans. 19 people who were talking to us in places where talking to us gets you killed, and their names moved on paper that had your call sign in the header, and somebody sold that paper and they died. Over 11 years, 19. Daniel Carter's cuffed hands were flat on the table. "Say their names." "I can't." "Say one." Mr. Carter, you've got a wife, Daniel said, and you told me about her 40 seconds after you walked in here because you wanted me to see you as a person. So say one name, just one. Prove to me that anybody up your chain ever once looked at a piece of paper and saw a person on it. And Marcus Dean opened his mouth, and nothing came out. And Daniel Carter nodded slowly, and Dean watched him do it, and something in the room's temperature changed by about 11 degrees. That's what I thought, Daniel said. At 1914, Dean said, "Here's the offer. Go ahead. It's a good one. It's the best one anybody's ever going to make you." He counted on his fingers. 1. Whitaker goes down. Full weight. Espionage the whole run, he'll die inside, and he knows it. 2. Reyes gets a commendation and a promotion and a posting in Virginia. She's been dreaming about since she was a lieutenant, and she keeps her whiteboard, and she never knows what was on the other side of it. 3. Sergeant Reed keeps his career, which, and let's be honest, he has done absolutely nothing to deserve this month. And 4. Dean spread his hands. "You go home." Daniel didn't move. "You go home tonight," Dean said. "Tonight. Your access gets restored Monday. Dot gives you your coffee. There's a letter of apology from the installation commander. There's a settlement. It's not small. Mr. Carter, it's the kind of number that pays for a college, and your daughter grows up in that house on that gravel road, and she goes to that school, and she reads at whatever level she wants, and in 10 years she's a person, and in 20 years she's got a life, and you sit in a chair at her wedding as a man who fixed things." At 1916, Daniel Carter said, "And what do you get to the name?" Silence. "We get to keep using it," Dean said. "That's it. That's the whole ask. You never confirm it, you never deny it, you never speak it, and the drawer stays sealed, and in return, everybody in your entire life gets everything they want. You want me to keep being the fall guy. Mr. Carter, you've been the fall guy for 11 years, and it's cost you nothing." And Daniel Carter said, "It cost me my wife's last 11 days. Marcus Dean stopped. "I sat in that room, and I held her hand," Daniel said. "And I did not think about her. Not once. For 11 days. I thought about you. I thought about the chair. I thought about what I was going to do, and where I was going to take my kid, and how long I had, and the whole time this woman is dying 18 inches from my face, and I am somewhere else. And Mr. Dean, I would give every year I have left to get one of those days back, and you are sitting there telling me, it cost me nothing." Nobody breathed. "You want to know what I want?" Daniel said. "You asked me. I'll tell you. I don't want the settlement. I don't want the apology. I don't want you in jail. You're a hand same as Ted. You just wear a better shirt." "Then what?" And Daniel Carter said, "I want the name back." At 1918, Marcus Dean said, "That's not a thing you can have." "I know. That's not Mr. Carter, that's not on the menu. That's not something I can go upstairs and request." "I know. Then why say it?" And Daniel Carter smiled that small, tired, apologetic smile. "Because I wanted you to say no," he said, out loud, where I could hear it. At 1919, Marcus Dean understood that he was not the one running the conversation, and had not been running it since 1903, and his hands went flat on the table. "What did you do?" he said. "Mr. Dean." "What did you do?" "You unplugged that camera," Daniel said, "because you wanted to talk like men. That was the whole play. That was the only thing I needed from you tonight, and you gave it to me in 6 minutes, and you gave it to me because you're a man who thinks the room is his." "Carter, there's a phone under the driver's seat of my truck," Daniel said. "Ted put it there. That was clever. I want to say that that was actually clever. A burner in the suspect's vehicle, so that when it all falls down, there's a phone with my prints on it." Dean went gray. "I found it Tuesday," Daniel said. "I've been driving around with it for 2 days. And at 16:22 this afternoon, it got a text that said, 'Tonight.' And Mr. Dean, I want you to think very carefully about a question, and the question is this. Who else has that number?" At 1921, Marcus Dean said, "Oh, you didn't." "I did." "Carter, you have no idea what you've—" "At 16:31 this afternoon," Daniel said, "before Ted ever called me, I sent that number a photograph of 11 months of a man walking out of a loading dock. And I sent it to every contact in that phone. All 4 of them. Dean was on his feet. And one of those 4 numbers, Daniel said, answered. At 1922, the door of that windowless room opened, and a man Daniel Carter had never seen before said, "Sir, we've got a problem." And Marcus Dean said without turning around in a voice that had gone completely, utterly flat, "Is it the press?" "No, sir." "Is it the Bureau?" "No, sir." The man swallowed. "Sir, it's an 81-year-old man in Tucson, Arizona, and he's been on the phone with a reporter from the Missoulian for 40 minutes, and he says his name is Ray Ostrowski, and he says he's got 19 years of paperwork in his garage." At 1923, Marcus Dean sat back down. At 1924, he started laughing. "Ostrowski," he said. "Ostrowski, the contractor." 19 years, Daniel said. "Good man, grandkids." "You gave him the contract to take it away from him." "I gave him a warning at 2 in the morning and told him to run," Daniel said. "And I told him one more thing. I told him to take his files with him and put them in a box, and never open the box unless a man called Danny called him." "And you never called?" "For 11 months, I never called." Daniel's cuffed hands turned over on the table. "I called at 16:33 this afternoon." Dean put his face in his hands. "What did you say to him?" he said. And Daniel Carter said, "I said, Ray, it's Danny. I'm sorry. Open the box." At 1927, 40 miles north, Chief Warrant Officer Elena Reyes's phone rang, and the voice on it said, "Chief, this is Beth Halloran. I'm a school principal, and I have a man in my kitchen who says you're the only honest person he's ever met, and I have a little girl upstairs whose father is missing. And ma'am, I have never called a stranger in my life, but I want you to tell me right now whether I should be calling the police, or whether the police are the problem." Reyes pulled over. "Ma'am," she said, "put the man on." "Chief," Mason's voice was ragged. "Ma'am, they got a car outside my house. My wife went out the back." Reyes closed her eyes. "Sergeant, listen to me. Where's Carter's daughter?" "With me. She's here. She's fine." "Is anybody watching that house?" "Ma'am, I don't know how to check that. I'm a sergeant, ma'am. I yell at people for a living. I don't know how to check that." And a small voice in the background said, "Mister." "Kid, not now. Mister." Lily Carter's voice, clear as a bell, right up against the phone. "There's a gray car. It's been there since before you came. It parked, and it didn't turn its lights off for like a whole minute, and my dad says a person who parks turns their lights off right away because they're done, and a person who's waiting leaves them on because they're not done." Elena Reyes sat in a government sedan on the shoulder of Route 12 with her mouth open. "Sergeant," she said, "put the child on the phone." "Ma'am?" "Put her on." "Russell." Then, "Hello." "Sweetheart, what's your name?" "Lily Carter." "Are you a soldier?" "I'm a chief warrant officer." "Is that a soldier?" "It's a soldier who reads a lot." "Oh," said Lily. "Like me." And Elena Reyes, 19 years in, who had watched a whole career of hard men lie to her in nice rooms, put her forehead on her steering wheel and laughed until it wasn't laughing. "Lily, honey, the gray car. How many people are in it?" "One." "Are you sure?" "There's one head." "Is it still there?" Pause. "No," Lily said. "It left when Tommy's dad came in the door really fast." At 1930, Reyes said, "Sergeant, get her out of that house." "Where do I take her, ma'am?" And Elena Reyes said something that ended her career at that installation, and she knew it as it came out of her mouth, and she said it anyway. "Take her to a school," she said. "Ma'am, Sergeant, listen. These people are very, very good at making a man disappear off a gravel road. You know what they've never once had to figure out how to do." Reyes started her engine. Make a kid disappear out of a building with 200 witnesses, 40 cameras, a front desk, a sign-in sheet, and 11 mothers in the parking lot. Mrs. Halloran's got keys to a school. Get in that school. turn the lights on. And Sergeant, ma'am, call every soldier you know. At 1931, Mason Reed said, "Ma'am, nobody likes me." And Reyes said, "Then call the ones who like him." At 1934, Private Ellis's phone rang at the barracks. "Ellis." "Sergeant." "Ellis, I need you to listen, and I need you to not say anything smart for about 30 seconds, which I know is the hardest thing I've ever asked of you." "Yes, Sergeant." "They took Carter." Silence. "Ellis." "Who's they, Sergeant?" "I don't know." "That's not an answer, Sergeant." "Ellis, I know it's not an answer." Mason's voice cracked. "I'm standing in a school principal's kitchen, and I have got no answers. I have got a little girl with a busted wrist and a man in a suit and a car outside my house, and I am calling you because I'm the only guy who was ever nice to him," Ellis said. "Yeah." Long pause. "Where do you want me, Sergeant?" "But I gotta be straight with you." Mason closed his eyes. "This is not a lawful order. This is not an order at all. I've got no authority. I might not have a job by Monday. And if you get in your car right now, there is a real chance it cost you your whole career." "Sergeant?" "Yeah. My uncle cried at a Thanksgiving table," Ellis said. 60 years old, silver star in a shoebox. And nobody ever came for him, Sergeant. Nobody ever showed up. He just sat there for 20 years being the scariest guy at the table, and nobody ever once came for him. Mason couldn't speak. "Text me the address," Ellis said. At 1941, Boyd showed up. Nobody could believe Boyd showed up. Boyd could not believe Boyd showed up. "Don't say anything," Boyd said, walking in. "Boyd, don't say anything." Boyd's jaw was working. "He fixed the boiler." "All right. That's it. That's my whole reason. 9 years I've been freezing in that building, and everybody said it couldn't be fixed, and that man fixed it in a day and a half, and I put a forklift through his truck door, and he said, 'She's got a lot of those.'" Boyd stood in Beth Halloran's kitchen with his fists clenched. "And I've thought about that every night for 6 days. He said, 'She's got a lot of those.' Like it was nothing. Like I was nothing. And I couldn't figure out why it bothered me so bad, and I figured it out about an hour ago." "Why?" Mason said. "Because he wasn't being tough," Boyd said. "He was being kind. He let me off. I did a mean thing to a man, and he let me off so I wouldn't have to carry it, and I carried it anyway, and I've been carrying it for 6 days. And Sergeant, I am 44 years old, and I have never once met a man who let me off." At 1955, there were 11 people in Beth Halloran's elementary school. At 2010, there were 26. At 2030, there were 41, and Beth Halloran had the lights on in the cafeteria, and coffee going in the teacher's lounge, and there were soldiers in the hallway, and 2 teachers and a school nurse who'd driven in from Bozeman, and a 19-year-old private named Nguyen, who had gotten off shift and driven straight there without changing out of his uniform, and Lily Carter was sitting on a cafeteria table reading a library book to a corporal who had a tattoo of a snake on his neck and was crying and pretending he wasn't. And at 2034, a gray car drove past that school very slowly. And 41 people looked at it. And it kept going. At 2036, in a room with no windows and no camera, a phone buzzed in Marcus Dean's pocket. He read it. He read it again. And then Marcus Dean, who had never in 22 years raised his voice, said, "They're at a school." At 2037, Daniel Carter, cuffed to a table 11 miles away, said, "Something wrong." Dean looked up, and for the first time all night, the two of them looked at each other with absolutely nothing in the way. No suit, no towel over the shoulder, no hospital chair, no 11 years. "You put your kid in a building full of witnesses," Dean said. "I didn't put her anywhere," Daniel said. "I've been in this chair since 7. "Then who—" "Mr. Dean," Daniel said. "That's the thing you never understood about any of this. And it's the same thing Ted never understood. And it's the same thing Mason Reed didn't understand for 18 years. Which is what?" And Daniel Carter leaned forward as far as the cuffs would let him. "You think the dangerous thing about me is what I can do," he said. "Isn't it?" "No, sir." Daniel's voice was almost soft. "The dangerous thing about me is that I've been fixing these people's doors for 11 months. At 2039, Dean said, "You're bluffing." "There are 41 people in that cafeteria," Daniel said. "By midnight there'll be 100, because somebody's cousin will call somebody, and somebody's wife will post a picture, and that reporter in Missoula is already in her car, and Ray Ostrowski has been talking for an hour and 11 minutes. Carter, and here's the part you really need to hear." Daniel's cuffs clicked once against the table. "I didn't do that. I didn't organize it. I didn't call one single person in that building. I made 2 phone calls today, and one was to an 81-year-old man, and the other was to a school principal to ask if my kid could sleep over." Dean stared at him. "Then who filled the cafeteria?" And Daniel Carter said, "The bully did." At 2041, Marcus Dean sat in a windowless room and understood that he had spent 11 years running an operation on top of a sealed file, and that the file had a man in it, and that the man had spent 11 months in a boiler room in Montana, doing the only thing that had ever actually threatened anybody like Marcus Dean in the entire history of the world. He'd been decent to people, on purpose, where they could see. "Mr. Dean," Daniel said, "you want to know why I let them cuff me?" "Why?" "Because if I'd have fought in that stairwell," Daniel said, "I'd have been exactly the man on your paper. 11 years of routing under Ghost Wolf, and then one night Ghost Wolf puts 9 soldiers on the floor of a federal building, and every question anybody ever asks after that goes into the hole and hits the floor and stops." Daniel's hands opened once, closed once. "So I knelt down," he said, "and I let them take me. In front of Elena Reyes, who's honest, and Mason Reed, who's loud, and 14 soldiers, who all watched me not resist. And now you've got a problem, Mr. Dean, and the problem is that the most dangerous thing in the state of Montana tonight isn't in this room." "Then where is it?" At 2043, Daniel Carter said, "It's in a cafeteria, and it's reading a book out loud." At 2044, the door opened again, and the same man said, "Sir." "What?" "Sir, Chief Warrant Officer Reyes is in the lobby." Dean closed his eyes. "Tell her to go home." "Sir, she's not alone." "Who's with her?" And the man in the doorway said, "Sir, she's got a first sergeant, a captain named Doyle, who says he's got 8 months to retirement and does not care anymore, and a reporter." At 2045, Daniel Carter laughed. It was quiet, and it was surprised, and it was the first laugh out of that man since a truck on a gravel road with a blue slushie in the cup holder. "Mr. Dean," he said, "don't." "Mr. Dean, I want to say something, and I want you to hear it, because you sat in a chair next to my wife, and I've waited 6 years to say it." Marcus Dean looked up, and Daniel Carter said, "You told me the weather." Silence. "You sat there," Daniel said, "and you told me the weather, and you walked out of that room thinking you'd handled it. And you had. You'd handled it perfectly. There was nothing I could do to you, not one thing. You had my name and my file and my kid's name, and you knew I'd never touch you. So I went and did the only thing you couldn't do anything about. Which was what?" And Daniel Carter said, "I raised her." At 2046, Marcus Dean said nothing at all. 6 years, Daniel said. Macaroni, hinges, slushies on Fridays. 11 months of taking a wrench off the back of my head and saying, "You dropped this." You want to know how you beat people like you, Mr. Dean? You don't. Nobody beats people like you. You've got the drawer and the seal and the chair and the weather. So you don't beat them. You just outlast them in front of witnesses, and one day the witnesses look up. At 2047, the man in the doorway said, "Sir, what do I tell her?" Marcus Dean sat in that room for 11 full seconds. Then he stood up and he straightened his jacket, and he did the last thing Daniel Carter expected. He reached across the table and unlocked the cuffs. "Tell her," Dean said, "that Mr. Carter's coming out." "Sir." Tell her he's coming out on his own feet through the front where she can see him." Dean's voice was absolutely level. "And son, plug that camera back in first." At 20:49, Daniel Carter stood up and rubbed his wrists. "Why?" he said. And Marcus Dean, 22 years and a man with a wife and a mortgage and a badge with no agency on it, looked at him and said the truest sentence of his entire career. "Because you were right," he said. "I couldn't name one of them." At 2051, the front doors of a building that had no sign on it opened, and Daniel Carter walked out under his own power. Elena Reyes was standing at the bottom of the steps, with a first sergeant on her left, and Captain Doyle on her right, and a woman from the Missoulian with a phone already recording, and she watched a maintenance contractor come down 4 steps with his hands loose at his sides and no cuffs on them, and the first thing she said was not a question. "You're walking." "Yes, ma'am." "Nobody walks out of that building." "I know. Mr. Carter." Reyes stepped in close and dropped her voice under the reporter's microphone. "What did you give him?" And Daniel Carter said, "Nothing." "Don't do that. Not to me. Not tonight." Her jaw was tight. "I burned 19 years in a hallway 90 minutes ago. I've got a captain behind me who threw away 8 months of the quietest retirement in the United States Army. So don't stand there and tell me nothing. What did you give him?" And Daniel looked at her, and he was so tired, and he said, "I gave him a chance to not be able to name one of them." Reyes didn't understand it that night. She understood it 4 months later at 2 in the morning in a hotel room in Virginia, and she sat straight up in bed and said it out loud to nobody. At 20:53, Captain Doyle said, "Carter." "Sir, I said some things about you in my office." Doyle's face was doing something complicated. "I said the truth is boring. I said an investigator who wants the truth to be interesting is a fan." "That's good advice, sir." "It's excellent advice," Doyle said, "and it's the reason I sat on my hands for 9 days while a man in a suit set up a table in my building. And son, I want to tell you something as a man who's got 31 years and a pension and a wife in Bozeman." He put his hand out. "I was wrong, and I'd like to shake your hand before anybody tells me I can't." Daniel shook his hand. "Sir," he said, "you're not wrong. The truth is boring." "Not this time." "Sir, yes it is." Daniel's voice was quiet. "The truth is a guy took 14 grand a year and 19 people died over 11 years. That's not interesting. That's the most boring thing that's ever happened." Doyle looked at him for a long moment. "Chief," he said without turning around, "take him to his daughter." At 2058, in a cafeteria 14 miles away, Lily Carter stopped reading in the middle of a sentence. "He's coming," she said. The corporal with the snake tattoo wiped his face with the back of his wrist. "Kid, nobody said anything." "He's coming." "How do you—" "Because Tommy's dad's phone buzzed and he looked at it, and then he stood up and he didn't say anything to anybody," Lily said. "And my dad says when a person gets good news, they tell everybody, and when a person gets news, they don't know how to say they stand up first." At 20:59, 41 people looked at Mason Reed. Mason stood in the middle of that cafeteria with his phone in his hand and his mouth open and absolutely nothing coming out of it. "Sergeant," Ellis said. Mason tried again. "Sergeant, is he—" And Mason Reed put both hands on top of his head and turned all the way around in a circle in a school cafeteria in Montana and said, "He's out. He's out. He's walking. Reyes has got him. He's out." And the cafeteria came apart. Boyd made a sound like a man getting hit. Nguyen sat straight down on the floor. Somebody was clapping, and it caught, and 41 people who had come to a school on a Thursday night for a man most of them had never spoken to were shouting in a room built for 8-year-olds. And Beth Halloran stood in the doorway of her own cafeteria with a coffee pot in her hand, and 31 years of her life behind her, and cried without making a single sound. And Lily Carter climbed off the table and walked over to Mason Reed and pulled on his sleeve. "Mister—" He couldn't hear her. Nobody could hear anything. "Mister—" Mason crouched. "You said you'd help him," Lily said. "Yeah." Did you? And Mason Reed opened his mouth to say yes and could not, because Sergeant Mason Reed had spent his whole life saying the sentence that made him look biggest, and he was standing 11 inches from a child who read at a 6th grade level. No, he said. A lady named Reyes helped him. A guy named Ray helped him. And your dad helped himself, honey, because your dad's been helping himself for 11 months and nobody noticed. Then what did you do? Mason swallowed. I got out of the way, he said. And Lily Carter thought about that for a second, and then she said the thing that broke Mason Reed all the way down to the foundation and rebuilt him. And she said it the way an 8-year-old says anything, which is like it's obvious. That's still helping, she said. At 2114, a government sedan pulled into a school parking lot with 41 vehicles in it. Daniel Carter got out, and nobody cheered. That was what Reyes remembered. She had expected a thing out of a movie, and what she got was silence. 41 people standing in a cafeteria doorway and a hallway and a parking lot. And they didn't cheer, and they didn't rush him. They just looked at him, and Daniel Carter looked back, and the first person to move was Boyd. Boyd walked up to him and stopped 3 feet away and said, I put a forklift through your truck. I remember. On purpose. I know. You said, she's got a lot of those. Daniel said, she does. And Boyd's face came apart 44 years old in a parking lot in front of everybody. Why didn't you say something? Boyd said. Why didn't you get mad? I wanted you to get mad. I needed you to get mad, man. Because if you'd have gotten mad, I could have been the guy who was right, and instead you let me off, and I've been carrying it for 6 days, and I can't put it down. Boyd. I can't put it down, and I don't know how, and my old man was like that. My old man never got mad either, and I hated him for it, and I didn't know why until... Boyd. Boyd stopped. Daniel Carter put a hand on his shoulder. Put it down, he said. At 2116, Corporal Boyd cried in front of 9 soldiers and did not care, and not one man in that lot ever brought it up again. And 11 years later at a funeral, Boyd would tell that story to a room full of strangers and still not be able to finish it. At 2117, Ellis said, Sir. Don't call me sir. Sir, my uncle. Ellis. Daniel looked at him. I know about your uncle. Ellis stopped dead. Sergeant Reed told me, Daniel said, 20 minutes ago on the phone from a school cafeteria in about 9 seconds because he was crying too hard to do it right. Daniel's face did something. You told him a man cried at a Thanksgiving table because he couldn't turn it off. Yes, sir. You want to know something true? Yes, sir. And Daniel Carter said, It doesn't turn off. Your uncle told you the truth. It never turns off, not one day, not for 1 hour, and any man who tells you he's put it down is lying to you or lying to himself. Ellis's face fell. But Daniel said, You can aim it. At 2118, Private Ellis, 22 years old, 4 months in, said, At what? And Daniel Carter said, At a hinge, at a boiler, at an old man in Tucson, at a kid's arm. He nodded once. Call your uncle's son. Tomorrow. Not next month. Tomorrow. And don't ask him about the silver star. Ask him about the glass in the sink. At 21:20, Ellis went out to his car and sat in it and called a 60-year-old man in Ohio at 23:20 Eastern, and that man picked up on the second ring. Because men like that are always awake. And Ellis said, Uncle Ray, tell me about the glass. And there was a silence on that line about 11 seconds long. And then a 60-year-old man said, Nobody's ever asked me about the glass. At 21:22, Daniel Carter walked into the cafeteria, and Lily was standing on a table. She'd climbed up on it. She had a library book in her good hand, and her wrist in a wrap, and she was standing on a cafeteria table in a school she went to, and she saw him come through the door, and she did not run. That was the thing. She did not run at him. She just stood there on that table, with her chin going, and she said in a voice that carried across a completely silent room, You said you'd be home before I woke up. Daniel Carter stopped walking. I did say that. You're early. Yeah. You're early, Dad. And Daniel Carter crossed a cafeteria in about 4 steps and took his daughter off a table, and 41 people looked at the floor and the ceiling and their boots and gave a man 10 seconds, and it was the quietest 10 seconds anybody in that building ever spent. At 21:24, Lily said into his shoulder, "Real voice." "Real voice," Daniel said. "Is it over?" And Daniel Carter said, "No." Reyes in the doorway closed her eyes. "It's not over," Daniel said, "and I'm not going to lie to you about it because I said I never would. But kiddo, the part where I do it alone, that part's over." At 2126, Mason Reed said, "Carter." The whole room turned around, because everybody in that cafeteria knew what Mason Reed had done. Every single one. Ellis knew, and Boyd knew, and Ween had heard it at the gate, and Beth Halloran had the police report about a bleacher in a drawer in her office 11 feet away, and the room went absolutely still, and Mason Reed stood in the middle of it with his hands at his sides. "I threw a wrench at your head," he said. Daniel said, "Sergeant." "No." Mason's voice was shaking. "No, I'm doing it here. I'm doing it in front of everybody because I did it in front of everybody, and I've had it explained to me real recently that the size of the room's got to match." Nobody breathed. "I threw a wrench at your head," Mason said. "I called you a mascot in front of 40 men. I said the word traitor in my own kitchen where my son could hear me, and my son put your daughter off a bleacher 2 days later and broke her wrist, and I drove to that school to yell at you about it. Me. I drove there to yell at you." Lily's arms tightened around her father's neck. "And you stood between me and your truck," Mason said. "And you asked me one question, and I couldn't get any air in." Daniel said nothing. 18 years, Mason said. 18 years I've been the biggest voice on that base, and I never once asked myself why I needed to be. And I found out this week. You want to know? He laughed, and it was ugly and it was honest. Because a guy named Ted Whitaker figured out in about 6 weeks that I was the cheapest tool he'd ever get his hands on. All you gotta do is find the loudest man in the building and point him. He never had to pay me. He never had to threaten me. He just had to agree with me. Somebody in the back said, "Jesus." 6 years, Mason said. Every man I ever went after. Every counseling statement, every report, and every single time somebody started sniffing around something, Ted didn't want sniffed. There's Mason Reed screaming his head off about somebody else. He looked around that cafeteria. "So here it is," he said. "I wasn't the bully. I was the distraction, and every one of you standing here, Ellis Boyd Nguyen. Every one of you that I ever put my foot on. I want you to understand something because it's the worst part, and I'm not going to soften it." "Sergeant," Ellis said quietly. "You don't have to." "I never even hated you," Mason said. The room went cold. "I never hated one of you," Mason said. "Not one. I didn't have a reason. I just needed the room to look at me because that's how I knew I was still in it. And Ted knew that about me before I knew it about myself. And he used it for 6 years, and 19 people are dead." At 2129, Mason Reed turned to Daniel Carter. "So I'm not going to ask you to forgive me," he said. "That's another thing I learned this week. Asking for that is just one more way of making the room look at me." Daniel Carter set his daughter down on the table. He walked across that cafeteria. And 41 people watched him stop in front of Sergeant Mason Reed, and every man in that room, every single one went tight in the shoulders, because there was still a part of all of them that expected the wrench to come back around. Daniel put his hand out. "Sergeant," he said, "is it going to happen again?" And Mason Reed, 41 years old, 2 deployments, 18 years of concrete, looked at that hand and said, "No." "Thank you," Daniel said. And they shook hands, and that was it. And later there would be 100 versions of that story on that base, and every one of them made it bigger than it was, and it was never bigger than that. A man put a hand out. A man took it. 11 seconds. At 21:31, Beth Halloran said, "All right, everybody out of my cafeteria. There are children in this building tomorrow at 7:45, and I have got a floor to deal with." And 41 soldiers said, "Yes, ma'am," at the same time, and it was the funniest thing that happened all year. At 06:11 the next morning, a reporter in Missoula published 900 words about an 81-year-old man in Tucson with a garage full of paper. At 7:40, it was 1,400 words, and there were two more names on the byline. At 1100, the phrase "Ghost Wolf" appeared in print in the United States of America for the first time in 11 years. At 11:08, a phone rang in an office in Virginia that had no sign on the door either. And here is the part that nobody makes a movie about, and it's the truest part, so stay with it. Nothing happened. Not that week. Not that month. There was no press conference. There was no man in handcuffs on a courthouse step. Ted Whitaker pled to something with a number in it and went away for 22 years, and that was the only name that ever appeared in a headline. And Ted Whitaker was a hand, and everybody who mattered knew he was a hand. And the story ran for 9 days, and then a hurricane hit Florida, and it was gone. Elena Reyes was promoted. That was the part that nearly killed her. 11 weeks after that night, Chief Warrant Officer Elena Reyes got the posting in Virginia she'd wanted since she was a lieutenant, exactly as Marcus Dean had described it, in a windowless room down to the building. And she stood in her new office on her first morning and understood with perfect clarity that she had been handed the thing she wanted most in the world by the people she was trying to catch, and that she would never ever be able to prove that those two facts were related. She called Daniel Carter that night. "They gave me Virginia," she said. "I know. You know. Chief, he offered it to me in the room. 6 years in Virginia, a commendation, and a whiteboard you'd never see the back of." Daniel's voice on the phone was calm. "I told him no." "You told him no?" "I told him I wanted the name back." Reyes laughed wetly in an empty office. "And they gave me the job anyway." "Yeah. Mr. Carter, am I bought?" Long pause on that line. "Chief." Daniel said, "I'm going to tell you the only true thing I know about people like that, and it took me 11 years to learn it, so I'd like you to actually hear it." "Go ahead." "They can't buy you," he said. "They can only pay you, and those aren't the same thing, and the difference is what you do on the day it stops being convenient." At 21:40 on a Tuesday in Virginia, Elena Reyes said, "How do I know which one I am?" And Daniel Carter said, "You'll find out. Everybody does." Mine was a chair in a hospital room. Reyes was quiet for a while. "Mr. Carter," she said, "the gate log. From that night. Dean badged on at 17:27 before anybody called anybody." "I know. Park printed it. On paper. And he put it somewhere, and he never told me where, because I told him not to." Her voice dropped. "It's been 11 weeks, and nobody's asked me for it. Not once." "No," Daniel said. "They wouldn't." "Why not?" And Daniel Carter said, "Because the second they ask, they've told you it matters." Marcus Dean retired 14 months later. It was not a resignation, and it was not a scandal, and there was a cake. He got 22 years a pension, and a plaque with his name spelled right, and he went home to a wife in Maryland, and a garden he had never once had time for, and in the spring of the following year he wrote a letter. He wrote it by hand, 9 pages. He did not send it to a newspaper. He did not send it to a committee. He sent it to a maintenance contractor at a rural route address in Montana, and it arrived on a Tuesday, and Daniel Carter read it standing at his mailbox for 11 minutes. There were 19 names in it. That's what it was. 9 handwritten pages and 19 names, and after each name, a place and a year and 1 sentence about who they were. The last line of that letter said, "I have thought about your question every day for 2 years, and I could not answer it in the room, and I am sorry it took me this long to be able to." Daniel Carter sat down on his front step and read 19 names out loud, one at a time, in a driveway in Montana. And when he was done, he folded the letter and put it in his shirt pocket, and he did not cry. He went and got a shovel, and he dug up a metal case out from under a shed floor, and he opened it, and he took out a hospital bracelet with a woman's name on it, because he had a rule, and the rule was that he could look at it when it was over. He looked at it for a long time. "Okay," he said. "Okay, honey." And then Daniel Carter put that letter in the case with the bracelet and the challenge coin and the 4 cheap notebooks, and he closed it, and he did not put it back in the hole. He put it on a shelf in the house, at the top of a closet, behind the sheets, where a kid could find it in about 10 years if a kid went looking, which she would, because she read at a 6th grade level, and she was going to read at every level after that too. That was the promise in the end. Not that she'd never know, that she'd never have to find out from a stranger. 2 years after that night, the training facility in Montana did not become a different place because of a speech. It became a different place because of a program. Mason Reed did not run it. That's important. Mason Reed asked to run it and was told no, and he took that, and he took it well, and it was the first time in his life he had ever been told no about anything, and not made everyone in the room pay for it. They put Ellis in charge. Sergeant Ellis, by then 24 years old, and the program had a stupid name that nobody liked, and everybody used, and it was 3 days long, and it was mandatory for every NCO on that installation. And there was exactly one thing in it that mattered. On the second day, they made every sergeant in the room write down the name of the loudest man in their section. And then they made them write down the name of the quietest. And then Ellis would stand at the front of that room and say, "Congratulations, one of those men is being used and the other one is being wasted, and it is your entire job to figure out which is which before somebody else does it for you." Mason Reed sat in the back of that class for 2 years, every single session, 14 times. He never spoke. He just sat there in the back where the room couldn't look at him, and that was the whole point, and everybody knew it was the whole point, and nobody ever said so out loud. And on the last day of every class, Ellis would say, "All right, anybody got a question?" And every single time some kid would put their hand up and say, "Sergeant, is it true about the wrench?" And every single time, Sergeant Ellis would look at the back of the room, and Mason Reed would stand up. "Yeah," he'd say, "it is true, I threw it." And then he'd sit back down, and that was all he ever said 14 times for 2 years. And there is not a soldier who came through that room who ever forgot it. Daniel Carter got his badge back on a Monday. Dot handed it to him along with a paper cup of black coffee. No sugar, and she did not say anything about it, and neither did he, and that was the correct way to handle it, and they both knew it. He fixed the boiler in Building 911 more times over the next 4 years. He fixed hinges. He fixed a walk-in freezer in the chow hall that had been broken since 2017. He fixed the sign at the gate. He turned down a job offer from the Department of Defense in writing twice, and the second letter he sent back had 4 words on it, and the 4 words were "No thank you, respectfully." He was late to school pickup approximately once a month for the rest of Lily Carter's childhood, and she gave him grief about it approximately once a month for the rest of his life. And every Friday at the Sinclair on Route 12, there was one blue slushie. No exceptions, no negotiation. At 80 cents in change, handed back every single time. Keep it. It's not mine. It's yours if I say it's yours. That's not how money works, Dad. Kid Daniel Carter would say, that's exactly how money works. 16 years later, Lily Carter graduated from law school. She did not go into intelligence. She did not go into the army. She did not go looking for a man in a suit, and she never once in her entire life put the words "Ghost Wolf" into a search bar, and her father never asked her why. She did civil rights work. Whistleblower cases mostly. The boring kind. The kind where an 81-year-old man in a garage has 19 years of paperwork and nobody will look at it. She was very good at it. And at her graduation, there were 11 people in a row for her, which is a lot for a girl who grew up on a gravel road with one parent. There was a school principal retired 71 years old who had driven 900 miles. There was a woman with silver hair who had been a chief warrant officer, and then something else with a longer title. There was a man named Boyd who cried the entire time and did not care. There was a master sergeant named Ellis who had a silver star in his family and a shoebox at home he opened now. And there was a man in the back who did not sit with the family. Mason Reed had asked. That was the thing. He'd asked, and Daniel had said yes, and Mason had said, I'll sit in the back. And Daniel had said, Mason, sit with us. And Mason had said, Danny, let me do it my way. I've earned about 11 inches of that girl's life, and I'd like to spend them where she doesn't have to look at me. And Daniel Carter had said, okay. But when they called her name, Lily Carter walked across that stage, and she stopped, and she looked out into that crowd, 900 people and a room the size of an airplane hangar, and she found the man in the back. And she pointed at him. Just once. Just a finger. And Mason Reed put his face in his hands and sat down. Daniel Carter died on a Tuesday in the fall at 71 in his own bed in the house on the gravel road with his daughter holding his hand. He was not murdered. Nobody came for him. There was no man in a suit at the end, and there was no chair by the bed, and there was no last mission, and no last secret, and no phone call at 2 in the morning. He got old. That's it. That's the ending. A man who was once the most dangerous human being that a certain kind of program had ever produced fixed doors for 29 more years, and got old and died on a Tuesday with his kid in the room, and there is not one thing in this entire story that he would have traded for a better ending. At the funeral there were 300 people in a town of 900, and Lily Carter, 44 years old, stood up in front of all of them, and she did not have notes, and she said, "My father was a nobody." Nobody moved. He told me that once, in a truck, on a gravel road. I was 8, and somebody had told me my dad was a nobody, and I came home crying about it, and he pulled over, and he said, "There's 2 kinds of nobody." She looked out at that room. "There's the kind that means you don't matter," she said. "And there's the kind that means nobody can find you." She let that sit. And he told me he'd tell me the difference when I was old enough to carry it. And he did. When I was 18. He sat me down at that kitchen table, and he told me all of it, every word, for 6 hours, and he never once made himself the hero of it. And I want to tell you what he said at the end. He said, "Lily, I was very good at something terrible, and then I stopped." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because your mother asked me to." 300 people, and not a sound. And I said, "Dad, is that it? That's the whole reason a woman asked you?" Lily Carter's voice did not shake. Ask anybody who was there. And my father said, "Kid, every man who ever did a great thing will tell you it was for a country, or a flag, or an idea. Don't believe him. It was for a person. It's always for a person." She stepped back from the podium. Then she stepped forward again. "There's a man here today," she said, "who threw a wrench at my father's head." 300 people turned around, and in the back row, 74 years old with a cane, Mason Reed did not move. "He's been coming to my dad's house every Sunday for 26 years, Lily said. "He taught me to drive a stick. He was at my wedding. He carried my father's casket into this room 40 minutes ago, and he asked to be in the back so nobody would have to look at him." She found him. "Mason," she said, "stand up." And Mason Reed stood up. "My father asked you a question in a parking lot when I was 8 years old," Lily said. "He asked, 'Is it going to happen again?' And you said no. And it never did. Not one time. Not for 26 years. She nodded at him. "You kept it," she said. "That's all any of us do. That's the whole thing. He kept a promise to my mother, and you kept one to him, and that's what he was. That's what he actually was underneath all of it. And everybody in this room spent 29 years trying to figure out what my father was." Lily Carter looked at 300 people. "He was a man who kept it," she said. And then she said the last thing. "They used to say in a hangar a long time ago that you're not fighting a man, you're fighting a ghost. That's what they were all so scared of. That's what everybody wanted to see. The ghost." She put her hand flat on the podium. "I want everybody in this room to understand something, and I want it understood, and I'm going to say it once. The ghost never came back. He had every reason. He had every right. He had the training and the name and the hate and 11 years of it stacked up in a shed, and 19 dead people, and a man who sat in a chair next to my dying mother and told my father the weather. And Daniel Carter buried the ghost in a hole under a shed floor and went and made macaroni. That's not the twist. That's not the secret. There is no secret. My father was exactly what he said he was from the first day to the last, and every single person who ever underestimated him made the same mistake, and the mistake was this. Lily Carter looked out at that room, and she had her mother's flat, unimpressed face, and she had her father's eyes, and she said it. They thought the quiet man was hiding what he was. He wasn't hiding. He was choosing. And that is the most dangerous thing a man can be, and my father was that man for 29 years, and he never took a single day off, and he never asked one person on this earth to notice. She stepped down, and 300 people in a small town in Montana stood up, and nobody clapped because it wasn't that kind of room. They just stood. That's the story of Daniel Carter. Not the wrench, not the stairwell, not the name in a sealed drawer that 3 agencies were afraid of. A man was handed the worst thing a person can be handed, and he made a choice. And then he made it again the next morning, and again the morning after that, for 29 years, in a house on a gravel road with a wrench in his hand and a kid in the truck. He was never a ghost. He was a father. And in the end, that was the strongest thing any of them ever met.